The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the Article 32 hearing room at Fort Hood was the silence, the kind of heavy, unmoving silence that settles over a space right before a storm breaks. Rows of uniforms filled the benches. Soldiers from multiple units, military police officers, junior enlisted who had heard rumors. Commanders who pretended they were not curious, and even a few civilians from the base legal office who were whispering too softly to catch. At the center of it all stood Military Judge Colonel Marcus Avery, tall, composed, silver-haired with a presence that could quiet an entire battalion. I stood at attention in my service uniform spine, straight palms, dry eyes forward, pretending the pounding in my chest was not as loud as it felt. Across from me on the respondent side sat the three people I had spent most of my adult life trying to please: my stepfather Craig, my stepmother Valerie, and my stepbrother Tyler. Craig wore a pressed button-down shirt, arms crossed jaw tight, as if he were the one wronged. Valerie clutched a stack of tissues pressed dramatically to her chest. Tyler sat slumped between them, staring at the floor, his hands trembling in a way that felt rehearsed. They looked small in that big room, but their accusations were massive enough to suffocate an entire career. Colonel Avery looked up from the case file and cleared his throat. The room stood. He nodded. "Be seated." Chairs creaked and fell still. "Counsel for the complainants, you may begin." Their attorney, a man with slicked-back hair and the confidence of someone used to bending narratives, stepped forward. "Your Honor, my clients are here today because Captain Elise Callahan engaged in conduct that made her stepbrother feel unsafe." The air shifted. People leaned forward slightly. The attorney continued spinning words wrapped in implication, suggesting impropriety without naming anything directly insinuating that my presence during a brief family visit had somehow become a threat to a grown man 5 years younger than me. Valerie began to cry softly on Q's shoulders, shaking. Craig raised his chin as if presenting himself as a protective father instead of the man who had sent me dozens of messages demanding financial favors disguised as family obligations. Tyler wiped at his eyes, refusing to look at me. "Your Honor," he whispered. "She made me uncomfortable." The whisper ran through the room like a struck match, lighting suspicion where there had been none. I kept my breathing steady, even as humiliation clawed at the back of my throat. I had arrested violent offenders overseas and faced down armed suspects in alleys darker than nightmares, but nothing prepared me for being painted as a predator inside a courtroom filled with my own ranks. Colonel Avery flipped through the file slowly, carefully, too carefully. His gaze paused. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He looked up at me then, at them, then back to the file, as if adjusting the frame of a picture that finally came into focus. "Captain Callahan," he said evenly. "Do you have anything to submit?" "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steady. I handed the judge a sealed folder. He opened it. The room held its breath. Inside were documents, statements, financial records, timestamps, audio clips, and one crucial report from the Criminal Investigation Division that none of them expected to surface today. Colonel Avery read in silence at first, then his eyebrows lifted slightly. He read another page slower this time, then another. The tension twisted so sharply I felt it physically. Craig shifted in his chair. Valerie dabbed her eyes faster, harder. Tyler looked sick. Colonel Avery leaned back just a little, as if giving himself space to absorb what he had just discovered. He exhaled through his nose, and for the first time since I entered the room, he smiled. Not a warm smile, not a polite smile, a knowing smile. A smile that said the truth was no longer buried under their performance. He closed the folder, tapped it once with 2 fingers, and lowered his voice so the words felt like they slid directly under the skin of the people sitting across from me. "Bring them in." A door opened at the back of the room. Footsteps echoed, firm, intentional carrying authority that did not belong to anyone in my family. 3 figures entered at once: an agent from Criminal Investigation Division, a representative from Adult Protective Services, and a deputy from the Bell County Sheriff's Office. Conversations in the room snapped silent. Valerie froze mid-inhale. Craig looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. Tyler stared wide-eyed, his performance crumbling as fast as the false story they had built. Colonel Avery spoke calmly, but each word hit like a hammer. "This hearing is no longer about alleged misconduct by Captain Callahan. It appears we have matters involving fraud, coercion, and potential criminal activity by the complainants. My pulse steadied for the first time in months. I kept my gaze forward, but inside it felt as if every locked door in my life had just swung open. And that moment, that exact second, was when everything finally shifted. My name is Captain Elise Callahan, and this did not begin in that courtroom. It began months before the day my family tried to destroy me. When people ask me what it is like to serve as a military police officer in the United States Army, they expect stories about deployments and tactical training and long nights on patrol. But the truth is that none of those things ever frightened me the way my own family did. My name is Captain Elise Callahan, and by the time I turned 30, I had already lived through enough chaos inside my childhood home to make any battlefield feel strangely orderly. I had just rotated back to Texas after 18 months in Germany, a deployment that left me tired but proud. I stepped off the plane at Fort Hood with my duffel on one shoulder and my badge and rank feeling heavier than usual because this time I was not coming home to friends or a warm welcome. My real family died when I was 17. My mother passed from a sudden stroke, and my father followed 6 months later in a highway accident that shattered whatever stability I had left. At 19, I still believed that family could be rebuilt and that maybe I would have a second chance at something soft and steady. That was the year Valerie appeared. She was kind at first, too kind. She arrived like a polished stranger with perfect hair and an even more perfect smile, and claimed she had loved my father deeply and wanted to keep me close because she knew how much he adored me. I was lonely, grieving, and too young to read the warning signs behind that careful voice. Within a year, she married Craig. He was a tall, broad Texan with a handshake that felt like a test and a gaze that measured the value of every person he met in dollars or obedience. Where Valerie used softness that felt like a trap, Craig used pride and an old-fashioned sense of dominance. I tried to believe it was just his personality and not something directed at me, but even back then I could feel the way his attention lingered too long on what he could gain from people. The last piece of the new family puzzle came in the form of Tyler, my stepbrother. He was 25 by the time I left for Germany, a restless and unfocused young man who could not keep a job longer than 3 months. His addictions shifted the way weather storms do unpredictable, and always someone else's fault. Valerie coddled him endlessly, and Craig protected him as if Tyler were the fragile heir to a legacy that did not actually exist. I was the only one expected to hold my life together, to stay strong, to be the example. I used to think that was a compliment, but later I understood it was simply because I was the only one they could not manipulate easily. When I returned home after deployment, I knew something was off the moment I reached the edge of Killeen and felt a strange knot forming in my chest. I chalked it up to exhaustion at first. Maybe the adjustment period between Germany and Texas was hitting harder than usual, but as I turned onto the street where Valerie and Craig still lived, the air felt wrong. It reminded me of the moment right before a domestic call goes sideways when the house looks perfectly normal, but your instincts tell you someone inside is lying. The truth is that I never stopped trying to be good to them. No matter how cold Valerie became after the wedding, no matter how often Craig dismissed my boundaries, no matter how many times Tyler made lazy jokes about my uniform or my leadership, I always tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. I was raised to believe that kindness was strength, that loyalty mattered, that family deserved patience. What I did not understand until much later is that some people see patience as weakness and kindness as an invitation to take more. Over the years, the mask slipped slowly. Valerie began to criticize the smallest things about me, from how I stood at attention to the way I folded my laundry as if my discipline were a personal threat to her authority. Craig developed a habit of questioning every financial choice I made, especially after he discovered that my career provided steady income and benefits Tyler would never qualify for. Tyler evolved from a petty nuisance into something more unpredictable. He lurked. He borrowed money he never returned. He made excuses that never added up. He watched me the way people watch someone they want something from. And somewhere along the way, the three of them bonded in a way that pushed me further to the edge. They were a unit. I was the outsider. Yet I still kept trying. I called home from Germany during holidays. I sent packages. I updated them about promotions. and each time they responded with shorter messages, colder tones, or long silences. Returning to Texas felt like stepping into a house built from old emotional bruises, but I told myself I could handle it. After all, I was military police. I handled worse. What I did not know on that first night back was that my return would ignite the final phase of a plan they had been quietly building while I was away. A plan that depended on my trust, my silence, and my willingness to believe they still cared about me. I was about to learn how wrong I had been and how far they were willing to go once they realized there was something of mine they needed desperately, something they were willing to destroy my career to get. And all of it began the moment I walked back into their house. I returned to Texas 18 months after my deployment, stepping out of the rental car with the kind of calm only the Army could drill into a person. But the moment my boots touched the familiar driveway of my childhood home, something in my chest tightened. The heat pressed against my skin, and the smell of warm dust and sun-baked cedar brought back memories I had not asked for. I walked up to the front door, expecting the usual sticky doorknob that needed a jiggle, but the key I had carried through 2 assignments and 3 moves did not fit. At first, I thought I had grabbed the wrong one. Then I realized the lock had been changed. A slow, cold awareness spread down my spine. I knocked. The sound echoed through the hallway inside. For a moment, no one answered, and then the door cracked open just enough for me to see Valerie standing there with a smile stretched a little too tightly. "Elise, you are early," she said, like I was a stranger who had interrupted her afternoon. I asked why the locks were changed. She launched into a rushed explanation about remodeling and security concerns and how she meant to call, but time slipped away. Her voice floated, but her eyes were calculating, and when she stepped aside, I knew I was walking into something I could not yet name. The house felt wrong the moment I entered. Not dirty or damaged, but disturbed. My room door was open, which never happened. When I glanced in, I saw the bed stripped, the drawers half closed, and boxes I did not own stacked in the corner. Someone had been inside my things, and not with care. I walked deeper into the room and saw my old framed photo from Basic tossed on the floor face down. That photo had survived Germany Storm's field exercises and an overseas shipment, yet it lay there like it had been pushed aside deliberately. Before I could ask Valerie why my belongings had been moved, I felt eyes on me. Tyler stood leaning against the doorframe, sipping from a cup with that slow, lazy smirk he always used when he wanted to make someone uneasy. He was 25 now, but still carried the air of a teenager drifting through life without direction. He let his gaze travel over me in a way that made my muscles stiffen, not because I assumed something sexual would actually happen, but because his tone and posture were crafted to imply something suggestive, the type of thing that would make older viewers suspect a darker tension even if the truth lay elsewhere. He said, "Welcome home, Elise," but it came out coded in something off-putting. Before I could respond, Craig appeared at the end of the hallway, arms crossed like he had been waiting for me to arrive hours earlier. He did not greet me. He only asked how long I planned to stay. I told him I was on leave for a few weeks, but would be returning to Fort Hood soon to check in and finalize reassignment paperwork. His lips pressed into a thin line like he disapproved of my career, though he had never done anything meaningful to help me after my mother died. Craig avoided meeting my eyes and instead walked toward the kitchen, calling Valerie for something that sounded like a staged distraction. When I stepped into the living room, the tension folded around me like a heavy blanket. Valerie finally cleared her throat and announced that since I was back, it would be a perfect time for us to talk about a business opportunity. My instincts tightened. She went on about how they had been planning to start a family venture, something that required capital, something that required someone with stable military income. I asked what that had to do with me. Craig suddenly became enthusiastic and pulled out a folder from the counter filled with forms printed from a loan agency website. He said we want to start a business together, all of us, and we need someone responsible to be the primary, because we have some issues in the past that complicate the application. He never said the words co-sign, help us cover our debts, or front the money, but the implication was so heavy I almost laughed. Tyler chimed in with a lazy grin, saying that with my Army pay and benefits, we could get approved easily. I asked why they thought I would risk my credit or military record for a plan I had never heard of. Craig stiffened, and Valerie forced another too sweet smile, saying, "Families help each other, Elise. You understand that, right?" I looked around the room at the three people who had barely visited me when I was overseas, who never sent a single care package, who only reached out when they needed something. I said calm and clear, "I am not signing anything." Every face in the room shifted. Tyler looked annoyed, and something darker flashed in Craig's eyes. Valerie tried one last push, calling me ungrateful, whispering that I was acting like someone too good for her own family now. I told them my decision was final. The silence that followed was sharp and ugly. I set my bag down on the couch and stepped outside for air. The Texas wind brushed across my face, carrying the scent of mesquite and hot earth, but it could not quiet the sinking feeling that something inside this house was spiraling. The changed locks, the invaded room, the too eager request for my signature, all of it wrapped into a pattern I had seen in countless domestic cases working as an MP. But sensing danger and proving it were two different things. When I walked back inside, Tyler was still staring at me, his expression impossible to read, and his eyes lingering in a way meant to make me uncomfortable. It was not attraction. It was leverage. It was performance. It was the beginning of something I had not yet understood, but would soon learn far too well. I began noticing the shift only 48 hours after returning to that house. It started with Valerie standing in the kitchen doorway while I tightened the Velcro strap on my patrol uniform, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if she were trying to hold something inside. She stared at my uniform the same way people stare at a stain on the carpet. When I asked if something was wrong, she did not hesitate. "Elise, you need to be mindful of what you wear around here. That uniform is too fitted. You know how people might think." I looked down at myself confused. It was a standard issue, Army combat uniform, the same cut and fabric every soldier wore across bases worldwide. It was not tailored or modified. It was regulation. Yet she said it again as if repeating it made it true. "It is too fitted." "This is a family home, Elise. You cannot expect everyone to be comfortable with you walking around like that." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway where Tyler pretended to be on his phone. Her words hit me like a sting because they implied something I could not voice, something inappropriate, something designed to make me second-guess my own presence in my childhood space. I tried to shake it off, telling myself her comment came from stress or her usual desire to control every inch of the environment. But the pattern did not stop there. Later that afternoon, I headed up the staircase to put my things away. Tyler stepped out from the landing above me, pretending to adjust a picture frame on the wall. As I passed him, he moved sharply, reaching toward my arm as if he meant to steady me. His fingers brushed my sleeve. The movement was too sudden, too intentional. My reaction was instinctive, trained, automatic. I pivoted on my heel, grabbed his wrist, and lowered his arm away from me without hurting him. A simple defensive maneuver we drilled endlessly in MP school. He looked startled, pretending he had been trying to help. Valerie appeared at the bottom of the stairs at that very moment and froze. Craig followed seconds later, anger already simmering in his eyes even though he had not witnessed what happened. Craig's voice thundered across the hallway. "Elise, what the hell are you doing? Do not make him feel embarrassed." Tyler lowered his gaze like a child playing victim despite being a grown man 5 years younger than me. I released his wrist immediately, but the damage was done. Valerie rushed up the stairs, acting like I had committed some terrible breach. "Elise, you cannot overreact to everything. We live in a peaceful home. You have to adjust." She made it sound like I was the aggressor, like my training and instinct to protect my personal space were flaws rather than survival skills. I tried to explain what actually happened, but Craig cut me off. "Let it go. He is sensitive. He did not mean anything." His tone was the kind that brooked no argument. In his mind, I was always the problem. My heart tightened with something I recognized all too well from childhood. That old feeling of being outnumbered, misunderstood, painted as unreasonable whenever I defended myself. I had spent years in the Army building courage and discipline, but with them in that house, it felt like I was 17 again, trying to survive under people who did not value my boundaries. The accusations and comments from all three of them began morphing into a new pattern. Valerie started leaving passive-aggressive notes on the table about appropriate dress around family written in her neat cursive as if I were still a guest who did not know the rules. Tyler began hovering too close in shared spaces in the hallway and the kitchen, watching me with that unsettling stare that made the back of my neck crawl. Craig started demanding I hand over my duty schedule so they would know when I came and went. It was all subtle, not enough to be criminal, not enough to call anyone for, but suffocating enough to remind me that something darker was developing under their surface politeness. Then, late one night, I overheard the first conversation that revealed their true motive. Their voices drifted through the half-open kitchen door, heated whispers bouncing off ceramic tiles. Valerie hissed first. "She has the benefit and the loan eligibility. If she signs it, Tyler can finally get the property." Craig replied in that low growl he used only when he was afraid of losing something. "She has to sign. If she refuses, we are stuck. We cannot get another lender. We cannot keep covering his debts." Valerie pushed back, her voice brittle. "Then we pressure her. Make it sound like she owes us. She has no family left but us. She cannot abandon us." My blood went cold. Suddenly, every strange look, every comment about my uniform, every attempt to corner me into guilt made sense. They did not care about my comfort or reputation. They cared about my GI Bill, my VA loan eligibility, and whatever money they believed they could siphon from me by making me feel obligated or ashamed. It was not about Tyler needing a hand up. It was about them wanting a shortcut, a financial rescue package, something the government granted me because I served not because they deserved. I stayed silent in the hallway that night, my hand squeezing the stair rail until my knuckles whitened. I wanted to walk in and confront them, but years of training told me to gather facts before reacting. When I stepped back into my room, I felt the walls around me closing in. I realized I had walked straight into a trap disguised as a family reunion. Suddenly, their comments about my body and uniform felt less like insults and more like attempts to create a narrative that I was reckless or inappropriate, something they could use to pressure or shame me into signing legal documents later. And then I knew with a sinking feeling deep in my chest that this was only the beginning. I noticed the shift before I could name it. It was subtle at first, just small things that would normally seem harmless, but somehow layered together into something that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. Craig had never been warm to me, but the new version of him was sharper, colder, impatient in a way that crackled in the air every time I walked into the room. Valerie followed me with her eyes as if she was tracking every breath I took, and Tyler lingered in places he had no reason to be, especially near the hallway that led to my old bedroom. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. After all, I had only been home a few weeks after 18 months in Germany, and transition periods always came with tension. But late one Thursday evening, the truth exposed itself in a way that left no room for comforting illusions. I had walked in through the back door after helping an old neighbor fix a loose fence panel. The house was dim except for the light under the garage door. I set down my keys quietly, not wanting to disrupt whatever mood my stepfamily was in. That was when I heard it. Craig's voice, low, angry, cracking slightly on the edges. I froze in the hallway just beyond the view of the living room and listened. He was in the garage on the phone with someone pacing in slow, heavy circles. The tone was enough to make my chest tighten. I leaned a little closer, careful not to let the wood creak. His voice carried through the thin door with a raw clarity. "If she does not sign, we are screwed." His anger rolled like heat. "No, you do not understand. We need that loan approved. She is the only one who qualifies." My stomach dropped. I stood perfectly still, absorbing every word like a blow. They were trying to force me to sign papers. VA related, GI Bill related, something they had absolutely no claim to. And the worst part was the way he said she like I was not even a person, but an obstacle. Then his tone shifted into something unfamiliar, something desperate. "Tyler cannot get out of this mess without it. You said you would fix this." Silence. I waited for more, but Craig's pacing slowed, then stopped. A long exhale followed, and the phone call ended abruptly. I backed away quietly, my breath tight in my chest. I knew I was in the right, but at that moment, the house felt hostile and smaller than it ever had. I needed confirmation. I needed proof. And as a military police officer, I knew exactly how to gather it. That night in my room, I sat at the edge of the bed and thought through everything methodically: the cameras, the laws, the limits, what I could and could not do. Texas was strict on recording inside shared spaces, but my bedroom was legally mine to record for security purposes. So I placed a tiny legal camera on the top corner of the dresser where it blended with a stack of books. Nothing invasive, nothing hidden in a shared bathroom or hallway, only my personal space. My hands were steady. My pulse was not. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. Valerie made pancakes but never looked at me directly. Craig avoided eye contact altogether. Tyler sat at the table pretending to scroll on his phone, but the moment I walked in, he straightened as if my presence jolted him. His eyes flickered over me in a way I did not like. "Not hungry," he said too quickly, then stood up and brushed past me to go upstairs. The smell of his cologne lingered behind him. I waited exactly 10 seconds before heading toward my room. I did not rush. I did not even change my expression. Years of policing had taught me that panic attracts attention. When I pushed open my bedroom door, my heart thudded once, then twice. The closet door was open. I always shut it. The camera light was blinking faintly, indicating motion had been detected, and one of my drawers was out 2 inches. I closed my eyes for a long moment, not from fear, but from certainty. Tyler was going through my personal space, not because of desire, not because of anything the thumbnail would force the audience to believe, but because he was looking for paperwork, financial items, anything he could twist into something useful for their scheme. I checked the camera feed later at Fort Hood and watched Tyler walk into my room twice in one afternoon. He never touched me, never tried anything. But he rifled through my desk. He searched through my deployment bags. He even checked the side table next to my bed. And every so often he looked toward the camera's blind corner as if making sure no one was watching. The footage was infuriating but also clarifying. It built the case that something much bigger was unfolding, something they were planning, something they were trying to hide. Over the next few days, Tyler repeated the same routine. Valerie watched me like I was the one about to commit a crime. Craig left early in the mornings and came back late smelling like cigarette smoke and stress. They were unraveling, and their fear made them reckless. The audience would assume something sexual, something indecent, something twisted. But the truth, the real crime, was far more calculating. They were trying to steal my benefits, my identity, my name, and use me as the scapegoat for Tyler's financial disaster. They thought they could corner me the way they always had when I was 19, naive, and still grieving my real parents. What they did not understand was that I was not that girl anymore. I was Captain Elise Callahan, United States Army Military Police. And they were about to learn what happened when you underestimated someone trained to detect lies. I remember that evening with a clarity that still makes my stomach tighten, because it was the first time I realized something in that house had snapped into place long before I arrived. I had just finished a run around the neighborhood, the kind of long, steady-paced jog that helped me quiet the noise in my head after a difficult day at Fort Hood. The August heat in Texas still clung to my skin even as the sun dipped low. I wore my standard PT outfit, nothing unusual for a soldier. Black shorts and a gray army shirt, loose, breathable, completely within regulation. When I stepped into the house, I felt 3 pairs of eyes cut toward me like I had walked in wearing something scandalous. Valerie was halfway down the hall with a dish towel in her hand, but when she saw me, she stiffened and let out a sharp breath. "There it is," she said, like she had been waiting for a moment to perform shock. "Elise, you cannot walk around here dressed like that." I blinked, confused. "Valerie, this is PT gear. I wear this on base every morning." She crossed her arms and tilted her head like I was a teenager pushing boundaries. "Not in front of Tyler. He is a young man. Show some respect." I glanced at Tyler, who was leaning over the back of the couch watching me in a way that made my skin crawl, even though he immediately looked away as if caught doing something he should not. His expression was strange, like admiration mixed with something unhealthy, and I could instantly imagine how an outsider could misread this. Craig stepped into the room, wiping grease from his hands. He had been in the garage half the afternoon. He gave me that same quick, irritated scan. "Elise put on something decent." I stared at them, genuinely stunned. "What are you talking about? This is standard issue." Valerie shook her head dramatically. I know what you are doing. You walk in here sweaty in little outfits and then pretend like you do not know the effect you have. The accusation hit me like a slap. What effect? What are you implying, Valerie? She did not answer. Instead, she turned away, muttering something about boundaries and decency. I went to my room to grab a towel because the interaction irritated me, but I was not about to fight over clothes. I figured her mood swings were just another attempt to reassert control like she always did when I came home from deployment. But the second I opened my bedroom door, I froze. Something was wrong. My duffel bag was unzipped. The clothes inside were shifted. One of my PT shirts was missing. I scanned the room slowly, remembering perfectly how I left things that morning. Nothing was how I had placed it. A prickle went up the back of my neck. Tyler. He had been near my door earlier. He had been hovering all day. I quickly checked my drawer. One more shirt gone. Someone had taken it. I stepped out of my room and walked toward the living room. Valerie and Craig were whispering urgently, and the moment they saw me, they stopped. I looked at Tyler. You were in my room again. He immediately put on a defensive posture like a startled animal. No, I was not. I have been right here. Valerie narrowed her eyes at me like she had caught a lie. Why would he be in your room, Elise? The tone implied something else. Something foul. Something fabricated. I held up a hand, trying not to get angry. Because someone went through my things. My clothes are missing. Tyler shrugged dramatically, the kind of shrug someone uses when they are overacting. I do not want your stuff, he said like I was accusing him of something ridiculous. I stepped toward the hallway, intent on checking the laundry. Then I saw it. My missing PT shirt was lying on the floor of the common room near the couch, crumpled next to Tyler's phone. Valerie gasped so loudly it was theatrical. Oh my God, she said, clutching her chest. Do you see? What kind of woman leaves her things around where a young man sits? Tyler immediately scrambled backward on the couch, acting like the shirt was evidence of something shameful. It was absurd, completely staged. He even made his face twist into a wounded expression, as if the presence of my shirt near him was some kind of temptation he could not handle. I stared at all of them, stunned at the sheer ridiculousness of this performance. Craig stepped forward, pointing a finger at me. We know what you are doing. The words echoed through the living room. They carried the weight of an accusation that had been planned, rehearsed, and now delivered with full force. I looked at Craig, then at Valerie, then at Tyler. Are you serious right now? That is my shirt. Someone took it from my room. Valerie stepped closer, voice trembling with fake outrage. And why would your shirt be down here, Elise? Explain that. My mind spun, trying to understand the angle. What was the game? What were they building toward? Then I remembered the financial papers I had found earlier, the phone call Craig tried to hide the growing desperation in this house. Tyler's debts, the forged documents, the constant pressure for me to sign over benefits. And suddenly, I saw it. They were not spreading sexual rumors because they believed them. They were setting the stage. They were creating a narrative, a weapon, something they could report. Something devastating enough to force me into a corner where I would sign whatever they wanted. I said nothing. I just stood there absorbing the full scope of their strategy. They were not clumsy about this. They were coordinated, calculated, dangerous. That shirt on the floor was not an accident. It was a signal that they were ready to escalate. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt something sharper than confusion and deeper than fear. I felt clarity. I left the house that night without saying another word. I did not slam the door, and I did not raise my voice. Years in the military police had taught me that silence can be louder than rage, and control can be sharper than any weapon. I walked straight to my truck, parked under the flickering street lamp, and I remember how my hands trembled slightly as I turned the key in the ignition. Not from fear, but from the realization that whatever was happening inside that house was no longer just dysfunction or tension. It was coordinated. It was deliberate. It was aimed at me. I drove the hour back to Fort Hood in near total darkness. It was close to 2200 when I pulled up to the MP barracks area, and the familiar sight of brick buildings, hum of generators, and distant cadence softened the tightness in my chest. While the base was quiet at night, it always felt honest. No lies, no games, no traps. Just soldiers living their lives under rules everyone understood. I parked and walked toward the MP building, still in my PT clothes, and still replaying every detail of what had just unfolded. Valerie's manufactured accusation. Tyler pretending to be embarrassed. Craig yelling like he was defending something fragile. The planted shirt. The twisted narrative. Something inside me clicked, and I knew they were setting a stage carefully and intentionally. I had just not yet figured out the script. Inside the MP office, Staff Sergeant Miller was finishing paperwork. He looked up the moment I stepped in and noticed my expression before I even spoke. "You look like hell, Captain," he said. "That bad?" "Worse," I said. He motioned me into the small office next to his. I sat down, feeling the fatigue of the day settle over my shoulders, and gave him a clean, honest summary of the past week. I did not dramatize it. I did not soften it. I told him everything exactly as it happened, from the accusations to the stares, to the way Tyler tried to corner me on the stairs, to the planted shirt, and finally to Craig yelling that they knew what I was doing. Miller listened without interrupting, which was rare for him. By the time I finished, his eyes were narrowed and his jaw was locked. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Captain, I have to say this plainly. If this escalates into a sexual misconduct accusation, you are in life-ruining territory." I nodded. I knew that. Every service member knows that. In the Army, nothing destroys a career faster than allegations tied to moral misconduct. It does not matter if it is proven later. The stain sticks long before the truth does. That is why you need to figure out what they actually want, Miller added. Families do not usually go nuclear without a motive. Something big is at stake here. Something they cannot get on their own. A motive, a target, a reason. Those words echoed in my mind long after I left the office. I walked back to my quarters and sat at my desk, staring at the folders I kept neatly organized. Deployment papers, award memos, my GI Bill qualification, my VA loan eligibility certificate. And it hit me. My benefits, my financial standing, my federal paperwork. All things none of them had access to, and all things Tyler desperately wanted because he had nothing of his own. Suddenly, a dozen small memories snapped together in a pattern that made too much sense. Valerie hinting that Tyler needed a fresh start. Craig asking about my loan eligibility. Tyler's sudden niceness. The family locking away their mail. The phone calls I overheard. Everything pointed in one direction. They wanted me to sign something. They wanted my signature and my status as a service member. But for what? I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. I opened my laptop and logged into my federal benefit accounts. Everything looked intact. No suspicious changes. No unauthorized requests. But that did not ease me. If they wanted my signature, they were not trying to steal something electronically. They were trying to manipulate me into agreeing on paper. And when I refused, the accusations started. I grabbed a notebook and wrote down every incident in sharp, clean handwriting with time and date stamps. Every MP knows documentation is the shield that saves careers. I included the planted shirt, the remarks about my PT clothes, the attempt on the staircase, the sudden accusations of impropriety, and Craig's angry outburst. Then I added in a separate list every strange financial hint from the past 2 months. I looked at the growing pages and my stomach twisted because the pattern was undeniable. They were constructing a narrative where I looked unstable, inappropriate, or morally compromised so that any refusal to sign anything could be painted as emotional outbursts, guilt, or manipulation. They needed leverage. They thought sexual innuendo was the perfect weapon, and they thought they could break me with it. The anger hit quietly, the kind that does not burn, but freezes. I had given this family years of loyalty and patience. I had paid their bills during hard months. I had helped Tyler out of trouble more than once. And now they were willing to destroy my reputation and my career because they needed my federal benefits. I closed the notebook and took a long, steady breath. I had 2 choices. I could retreat and hope the storm passed, Or I could treat this exactly like any other threat to a soldier's integrity. I could investigate. I could document. I could uncover their motive. And I could dismantle their story before it had the chance to grow teeth. I chose the second without hesitation. I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror above my sink. My eyes were tired but focused, the kind of focus I only ever felt during field operations. If they wanted a battle, they had picked the wrong soldier. Tomorrow, I would start digging, and I would not stop until I knew exactly what they were planning. I whispered to myself the same words my first MP instructor had drilled into us. Find the truth, and the rest will fall. I turned off the light and sat on the edge of the bed, knowing sleep would not come, but clarity already had. The fight had begun, and for the first time, I understood that I might actually win it. I sat in my small on-post apartment that night, staring at my laptop like it might suddenly give me answers. My pulse had not settled since leaving my stepfamily's house. The way Valerie's eyes sharpened when she accused me, the way Tyler looked at me like he was waiting for me to react, and the way Craig acted like I had already been convicted of something unspeakable. None of it made sense. But I knew one thing about being military police. When the story sounds wrong, someone is hiding something. I started with something simple, my personal records folder. I had a quiet suspicion that the argument I overheard on the phone was connected to something financial. Soldiers do not get dragged into false misconduct reports out of nowhere. There is always a motive, and motives usually have dollar signs attached. I opened my digital files and froze. There was a document in the scanned folder I did not recognize. A VA home loan pre-approval form, with my name on it, and a signature that looked almost like mine. Almost. My stomach clenched. I zoomed in on the signature. The loops were wrong. The slant was wrong. Whoever forged it had studied my handwriting, but not enough to fool someone who had signed her name on thousands of military documents. I whispered to myself as the sinking truth began to crawl across my skin. What did you try to do with my name? I searched my email. Nothing. I searched my physical mail. Only bills and training notifications. No loan paperwork had ever been sent to me. That meant someone intercepted it or someone used my identity without my knowledge. I pulled out the small lockbox where I kept my original documents: birth certificate, social security card, DD 214 copies. Nothing missing. My breath felt heavier. If nothing was missing physically, then the fraud came from elsewhere. Someone who knew enough about me to steal pieces of my life and stitch them into something dangerous. Someone in that house. Someone who wanted money. I remembered the late-night phone argument, Craig saying if she does not sign, we are screwed. Screwed how? Screwed who? I ran a public record search on Tyler next. It felt like betrayal even typing his name into that system. But truth mattered more than loyalty to people who showed me none. My heart dropped when the search returned a set of county-level notices. Tyler had been sued by a payday lender 8 months earlier. He owed almost $7,000. A few weeks after that, he had a citation for a bar fight, then another for unpaid vehicle fines, and then the line that made everything inside me sharpen with cold realization. Notice of debt collection escalation and referral to outside recovery group. In Texas, that often meant what people politely call private recovery contractors, the kind that show up at your door at midnight expecting money. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my palms to my face. Tyler was drowning in debt. Craig and Valerie had no stable income. They needed a solution. And I, the responsible soldier with a clean record, steady pay, and perfect credit, was the solution. A rotten pit formed inside my stomach. They had tried to use my VA loan eligibility, something only veterans or active duty service members could access. They forged my signature because they knew I would never agree. But why the sudden shift to accusations about me tempting Tyler? Why the comments about my clothes or my behavior? Why did Valerie act like I was dangerous to her son? Unless, I swallowed hard, unless they needed leverage, something to corner me with, something frightening enough that I would sign anything just to make the accusations stop. Sexual misconduct, the most destructive accusation you can level at a female service member. It destroys careers long before the truth comes out. It buries reputations under whispers. It follows you from station to station even if you are cleared. If they could make me look guilty or even suspicious, they could scare me into signing anything they wanted. My chest ached as the final pieces clicked together. They were using my career as a hostage. They were using my reputation as a weapon. They were painting me as someone who tempted their grown son because that accusation would terrify any soldier. It disgusted me so deeply I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not anger, something sharper, something colder, a kind of betrayal that strips the last softness off your memories. I stood up and paced my living room. Every step felt like the ground shifting under me. They had set me up. They had staged the gym clothes incident. They had twisted innocent moments. Tyler was not looking at me like a man looking at a woman. He was looking at me like a man following orders, creating a trap someone else designed. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside into the night air. Fort Hood lights glowed across the field. Quiet, steady, military order in a world falling apart. I drove to the 24-hour on-post resource center and scanned the bulletin about fraudulent claims. One line hit me like a hammer. Forging a service member's signature on federal loan documents can result in felony charges and military jurisdiction involvement when done by immediate family. My lungs tightened. Craig, Valerie, Tyler. They were not just reckless. They were criminal. And they were willing to destroy me to save themselves. I returned to my apartment and sat at my desk. I took a deep breath, opened a new folder, and labeled it Evidence. I uploaded the forged signature, the suspicious loan form, the audio clip from Craig's phone call that I had recorded without even realizing how important it would become. Then I opened a blank document and wrote the sentence that changed everything. They tried to steal my life. My hands trembled slightly as the weight of what I had uncovered settled inside me. No more confusion. No more hoping they would explain themselves. This was intentional, calculated, cruel. And now I had proof. Real proof. Proof that would not just protect me, but expose them. For the first time since stepping into that house, I felt clarity cutting through the fog like a blade. I whispered into the quiet room. You wanted a fight. Now you have one. I thought the worst was behind me after discovering the forged documents, but I underestimated how far my stepmother Valerie would go when she felt cornered. It was a Thursday afternoon in early May, the air thick and heavy in central Texas, the kind of heat that feels like it is pressing a hand on the back of your neck. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at Fort Hood dealing with a domestic disturbance call that left my uniform coated in road dust when my phone buzzed with an email notification from Military Family Advocacy. At first, I thought it was a routine bulletin, some training requirement, or a new update about the summer safety campaign. Instead, the subject line hit me like a punch. Allegation report concerning Captain Elise Callahan. My hands went cold. I opened it right there in the parking lot, leaning against my cruiser as the sun burned low over the motor pool. The report was long and exquisitely crafted, exactly the kind of document someone spent hours perfecting until every word pointed guilt at me. And the name on the signature line was Valerie's. She had written that I had been acting inappropriately toward my stepbrother Tyler, that I had made him uncomfortable during my stay at their home, that I had entered his room late at night, that I had worn clothing meant to provoke him, that he had told her he felt unsafe, yet I kept approaching him. Reading it felt like being shoved under water. The world muffled around me and my pulse hammered in my ears. She framed every normal action, every accidental moment, as if it had been orchestrated. The PT gear I had worn after my evening run was described as seductive attire. The moment Tyler bumped into me on the stairs was twisted into me initiating unwelcome contact. Even the missing shirt Tyler planted in the living room was included, presented as if it proved I was wandering around trying to catch his attention. It was an incredible fabrication, but it was written with emotional language designed to trigger institutional response. They knew exactly which strings to pull. Sexual misconduct allegations in the military are taken seriously sometimes to the point where an accusation alone can halt a career, especially for an MP. Someone reading this without context would assume I was dangerous. I could almost hear Valerie's voice in the phrasing of the report, playing the victimized parent protecting her adult son from the evil stepdaughter. I called the family advocacy office immediately, my voice tight as I tried to get answers. The specialist on duty told me the case had already been referred to the Military Police Investigation Branch. The words made my stomach hollow out. I walked into the MP building, still dusty from the shift. The front desk sergeant saw my face and asked if I was all right. I was not. Two agents brought me into a small interview room, the kind I had sat across from as an investigator dozens of times. Now I was in the opposite seat, and I hated every second of it. They began asking standard intake questions. Did you stay at this residence? Was your stepbrother present? Did you wear this type of clothing? Did you interact with him at these times? Every question was a knife. I answered calmly, professionally, but inside, something was cracking. I finally said I wanted on record that this allegation is false malicious and tied to a financial fraud scheme. The senior agent paused his pen, hovering over the page. What fraud? I outlined everything I had discovered: the forged VA documents, the attempts to pressure me into signing the GI Bill. Transfer the phone call I overheard when Craig said, if she doesn't sign, we are screwed. I gave them the photos of the forged signature, the texts between Craig and Valerie about pushing me to sign papers I had never seen before, and the time-stamped logs showing Tyler entering my room without permission, something they clearly omitted in the report. Both agents exchanged a look, but procedure required they stay neutral. The senior one finally said, Captain, due to the nature of the allegation, an Article 32 hearing is required. You will receive formal notice within days. Article 32. A preliminary military hearing similar to a civilian grand jury. A place where careers go to die if the wrong narrative sticks. I sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream, but MPs do not scream. MPs breathe through it. I forced my breathing to slow, but my mind kept replaying the same thought. They were trying to bury me, not just embarrass me, not just steal from me. They were trying to destroy everything I had built since I was 17 years old and put on my first pair of combat boots. I drove back to my apartment near Fort Hood and found a voicemail waiting. It was my stepmother, her voice trembling just slightly enough to sound believable. Elise, they know everything now. You need help. Tyler is traumatized. Please cooperate with the investigators. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but the threat underneath was razor sharp. She was confident that the accusation would stick, confident that I would fold, confident that no one would believe me because she thought she understood how sexual misconduct cases move through the system. She thought she held the upper hand. She thought I was cornered. She thought wrong. The next morning, the official summons arrived, delivered by an MP at my office. I signed for it, my hand steady, even though my stomach burned like acid. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later at Fort Sam, Houston. I had 14 days to prepare for the biggest fight of my life. Staff Sergeant Miller came to my desk the moment he saw my face. He had been in the Army longer than I had been alive, and he knew the look of a soldier carrying something crushing. We stepped into the hallway, and I told him everything. He listened quietly, then said the thing I dreaded hearing. Captain, even an accusation can shadow you for years. If they are setting you up, you need proof, real proof. He was right. I needed more than suspicion, more than fragments, more than camera clips of Tyler creeping into my room. I needed a full picture, a motive, a timeline, a pattern, and if I wanted to expose them, I had to build a case stronger than theirs. I walked out into the Texas heat and made a decision that felt like steel forming inside my chest. If they wanted war, they were going to get one. I walked into the CID office at Fort Hood with every piece of evidence I had gathered stuffed neatly inside a brown document folder. My hands did not shake, but my heartbeat felt heavy in my chest like a slow, vibrating drum. The Criminal Investigation Division building always smelled faintly of paper dust and overworked air conditioning. Today, it smelled like the place where truth would finally begin moving in my direction. Agent Michael Ward was waiting in his office when I arrived. He was in his 40s with a calm face that never betrayed emotion except around the eyes where tiny lines formed when he sensed a lie. I respected him because he never let rank sway his judgment. Evidence came first. Truth came next. Hierarchy came last. That kind of clarity was exactly what I needed. Captain Callahan. He greeted me in a steady voice. You said you collected materials relevant to the complaint filed against you. Yes, sir, I said, and placed the folder on his desk. Ward did not rush. He opened the folder slowly, flipping each page with a deliberate patience that made me more aware of the silence in the room. The first few documents were benign proof of my recent deployment photos of my time in Germany paperwork verifying my assignments. Then came the images I captured from the small legal camera hidden in my room. Ward leaned forward. "What am I looking at, Captain?" "My stepbrother," I said, entering my room without permission. Ward studied the timestamp. He returned multiple nights. Tyler had a pattern sneaking in, looking through my drawers, holding my PT shirt to his face with a strange expression. I had never felt so violated, and yet none of this was about attraction or scandal. It was about staging narrative. It was about crafting a story that made me look like someone unhinged, reckless, morally compromised. Ward clicked his tongue softly. Did he ever speak or do anything directly threatening? "No, sir, but the intent behind his actions is clear when compared to what my stepmother filed." Ward nodded, flipping to the next set of photos. "Valerie forged my signature on VA home loan documents," I added. I highlighted her handwriting, mismatched strokes, the fraudulent form number, and printed date that I never accessed. Ward exhaled slowly. "This is federal level." "Yes, sir." Next were screenshots of text messages I pulled from my stepmother's phone the night she accidentally left it unlocked in the kitchen. I had used the camera to capture the screen because touching the phone myself would risk legal trouble. Ward read each message quietly. Valerie telling Craig, "If she signs, we clear everything." Valerie telling Tyler, "Just act upset. They always believe the quiet one." Craig responding, "She earned this uniform, she can pay for it." Then the line that turned my stomach, "If she refuses, we destroy her career." Agent Ward did not show emotion, but his eyes sharpened in a way I recognized. He was locking onto a pattern. "Captain," he said slowly, "these messages alongside the forged loan paperwork and your footage indicate a coordinated attempt to manipulate your status as a service member." "Yes, sir." Ward tapped a finger on his desk. "And they submitted the misconduct complaint after this." "The same week, sir." Ward leaned back in his chair. "That timing is suspicious. They would have needed to establish motive or context for a loan transfer to work. If they could paint me as unstable or inappropriate, even quietly, the VA and the Army would scrutinize everything I touched. If they could ruin me professionally, they could gain sympathy that Tyler was the dependent who needed aid. A soldier with ruined credibility is easier to sacrifice." Ward nodded. "Filing a false sexual misconduct allegation is extremely serious. It undermines real victims and weaponizes the system." I felt anger stir in my throat. They did not care about victims or misconduct. They cared about money and wiping clean Tyler's gambling debt. Ward continued examining the evidence. "We need to verify all this through formal channels. I can request financial records from the bank that received the VA loan application. If Valerie submitted it in your name, the digital signature trail will remain. It cannot be fully erased." "Yes, sir." Ward flipped to the final item, a short audio clip on a small recorder. I pressed play. Valerie's voice filled the room, crisp and venomous. She said, "She will sign or she will lose everything. She thinks the Army will protect her. They will not when we are done." Ward's head lifted. "Where did you get this?" "My camera's microphone, sir." "Legal placement in my room." Ward nodded firmly. "This will hold. It has clear intent and it contradicts their report." Ward set everything aside, then folded his hands. "Captain Callahan, to be transparent, I cannot promise immediate reversal of the Article 32 summons. The Army must proceed with due process." "I know, sir, but this evidence supports your version strongly. The complaint filed against you appears retaliatory and connected to financial fraud as well as coercion." I took a breath, steady as I could. "What is the next step, sir?" "I will open a parallel inquiry," Ward said. "I will contact the county records office for the loan documents, then speak with the Texas Sheriff's Department regarding Tyler's debts. If they confirm he owes money to local criminal groups, it strengthens your case. That they intended to use you as collateral." "Exactly." Ward paused. "Captain, this is bigger than family conflict. These actions involve federal fraud, identity misuse, and manipulation of military reporting channels. They used the accusation system as a weapon." "Yes, sir." Ward made eye contact with me for the first time that afternoon. Captain Callahan, if what you brought me holds up, your family will not walk away from this quietly. I already knew that. I had known it from the moment Valerie started implying I attracted attention or caused trouble. She was planting seeds, building a false narrative piece by piece. My mistake was thinking she only wanted emotional leverage. I had underestimated their desperation. Ward stood. I will notify JAG and the judge overseeing your Article 32. They may integrate this evidence sooner than expected. It could change the tone of that hearing significantly. My pulse quickened, remembering the way Valerie smirked that day she filed the report as if she had already buried me, as if my rank, my service, my integrity were nothing more than tools to exploit. Ward extended his hand. Stay available, Captain. We will be in touch. When I stepped out of the CID office, the Texas heat slapped my face, almost like waking me up from a trance. I walked toward the parking lot, my shadow stretching across the pavement, thinking only one thing. They thought they cornered me. They thought they understood the uniform they tried to destroy. They had no idea what I was about to do next. I remember the night with a clarity that still feels sharp along the edges. It was a Thursday in late April, a few weeks after I had submitted my initial evidence to CID. And I had spent most of the afternoon at Fort Sam, Houston, completing a mandatory briefing for MP personnel returning from overseas assignments. My mind should have been focused on reacclimating to stateside procedures, but instead it was pulled back toward the increasingly hostile messages from my stepmother and stepbrother messages that came multiple times a day and always circled around the same theme. Sign the papers. Help Tyler. Do what family does. I had ignored them, blocked some screenshotted others for my file. I thought keeping distance would de-escalate everything. I thought wrong. When I drove back to my apartment near the edge of San Antonio, just south of the medical district, the parking lot lights flickered in the humid evening air. I noticed Craig's truck before I noticed him. The old Chevy dented along the left rear panel was parked crookedly across two guest spaces. My stomach dropped. He had no reason to be here. I parked a few rows away, debating whether to call the police immediately, but part of me hoped that maybe he had finally come to talk to apologize to end this quietly. That small hope was naive. I stepped out and kept my keys between my fingers, the way MP instructors recommend when walking alone, not as a weapon, but as a reminder to stay alert. The breeze carried the faint smell of asphalt and cut grass. I walked toward the staircase leading to my second-floor apartment. Craig stepped out from behind it. "Elise, we need to talk." His voice was low, but tense, like he was trying to hold something tightly inside. I kept my posture neutral, the same posture I used during volatile domestic calls on duty. "What are you doing here, Craig? This is my home." "You need to leave." He shook his head and took a slow step closer. "Valerie is losing it. Tyler is panicking. You can end this. You can fix this for all of us. Just sign the papers and this goes away." I stared at him. "I am not signing anything, and the more you push, the worse you make it for yourself." He flexed his jaw, the same gesture he always made when he was pretending to be calm while actually simmering. "Elise, listen to me. You think you can go to the army and make us look like criminals? You think anyone is going to believe you over your own family?" He stepped closer. I stepped back, keeping space. "Craig, turn around and leave. I am not asking again." What happened next unfolded fast and ugly. He lunged forward, grabbed my arm, and shoved me against the wall of the staircase. The movement was not sexual, but forceful, an act of control meant to intimidate. My shoulder hit the railing. Pain shot down my side. His forearm pressed across my collarbone, holding me still. "Sign the damn papers, Elise. Just sign them. You do not want this to get worse." His breath smelled like cheap bourbon. I mentally shifted into MP mode, that tactical mindset that clicks in when survival is more important than fear. I dropped my weight, suddenly forcing his balance forward, then pivoted sideways, breaking his grip. He stumbled but caught himself on the railing. I pulled back, already creating distance. "Do not touch me again." He came forward, angrier, faster. "You think the army will save you. You think anyone cares about your career. Tyler needs this. We need this. You are being selfish." He reached for me again. I moved. I parried his arm aside and shoved him off balance enough for him to slam into the wall. Not hard enough to injure, but enough to stop whatever he had planned next. My voice was steady. Back away. I am calling the police. He glared at me like I had betrayed him personally. Everything that has happened is your fault. You owe us a lease. After everything we did for you. The accusation hit like a slap, and not because it had truth, but because of the audacity behind it. My parents died when I was 17. Valerie and Craig had not raised me. They had tolerated me and used me and lied to me. I pulled out my phone and hit record only for documentation, then dialed 911. Craig froze for a moment, caught between anger and panic. Then he spat on the ground near my feet and stormed toward the parking lot. You will regret this, Elise. You will regret it. His truck screeched as he pulled out and disappeared into the dark street beyond the complex. I stood there letting the adrenaline burn off slowly the way instructors teach. Shoulders relaxed, breathing controlled, awareness returning. The dispatcher kept me on the line until 2 SAPD cruisers arrived, followed by a military police vehicle from Fort Sam Houston. I explained everything calmly, handing over my video clip and the screenshots of the messages. The officers listened closely, especially when I mentioned forged documents. The MP sergeant took notes and spoke quietly into his radio. He asked if I felt safe staying in my apartment for the night. I said yes, though we both knew safety depended on what Craig did next. The sergeant gave me a final look of reassurance. Captain, we will file this immediately. CID is already looking into your case. What he did tonight is not going to disappear. I nodded, feeling gratitude, but also a strange, emerging clarity. For months, I had tried to keep peace, tried to avoid escalation, tried to hope my family would not cross another line. Tonight proved they would cross every line they could find. The sergeant walked me upstairs to double-check the locks. The hall felt too quiet. When he left and the door finally shut behind me, I allowed myself a single long breath. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a crime, and now it was officially on record. And for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that I would not let them bury me to save themselves. I was done being afraid. I was done being quiet. What they started tonight, I was going to finish with the full weight of the truth behind me. I had handled criminal files across 3 bases, interviewed soldiers who lied without blinking, and unraveled investigations that took weeks to understand, but nothing prepared me for the moment when I realized my own family had crafted a scheme more deliberate than anything I had seen on duty. When I sat down in my small apartment near Fort Sam Houston that night, the same apartment Craig had tried to corner me in hours earlier, I felt something inside me harden in a way that surprised even me. It was not just the anger or the bruising on my shoulder where he had shoved me. It was the clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when the last piece of a puzzle finally falls into place. I spread every document across my kitchen table. The forged VA loan forms, the envelopes bearing my name in handwriting that was close to mine, but not close enough. The half-torn note Valerie had scribbled, reminding Tyler to delete something from his phone, and the printouts from my hidden camera showing him entering my room without permission. I lined them up like evidence markers at a crime scene, labeling mentally which document tied to which lie. But something still felt missing. Something that would show intent in the clearest, boldest way, because in legal cases, especially federal ones, intent is everything. I sat back, rubbed my forehead, and thought about their behavior over the past few months, about the way Craig had paced while arguing on the phone about the panic in Valerie's voice, when she said, "If she does not sign, we are done," and about Tyler's nervous twitch every time money was mentioned. And then I remembered the spiral notebook I had glimpsed in Tyler's car the day he drove off in a cloud of dust after yelling at me in the driveway. A black composition book with the corner chewed off, likely from stress, something addicts often did. He had thrown it on the passenger seat and slammed the door without realizing the window was still down a few inches. I remembered thinking it did not look like a journal. It looked like something else. A log, a record, a debt list. My heart thudded as the realization hit. If Tyler had written down anything about owing people money, and especially if he had mentioned using my benefits or forging my name, that notebook would be the final nail. I grabbed my keys, drove to the house I grew up in, and parked down the street where the streetlight flickered. I knew Tyler rarely locked his truck. He had always been careless in ways that matched the rest of his life. Careless with jobs, careless with money, careless with responsibility. I walked toward the vehicle, quietly scanning the neighborhood old habits from patrol shifts kicking in. The truck was unlocked. Of course it was. The notebook was wedged beside the seat exactly where I had last seen it. I slipped it into my uniform jacket and walked back to my car. Heart pounding, not from fear, but from adrenaline, the kind that surges when you know you now hold the truth in your hands. At my apartment again, I opened the notebook under the lamp. The first few pages were scribbles of numbers, nothing useful, but halfway through the real content began. Names, initials, phone numbers, and then whole phrases that made my breath hitch. T. The guy wants the money soon. Mom says use E call sign to get loan. Dad says she will sign once she breaks. If not, we accuse her. I stared at those words, my pulse hammering as the image of my family twisted from toxic to criminal in one sentence. They had planned everything. Not reactive, desperate. Planned, and then another page even worse. Dad says if she refuses, we file sexual complaint. Mom will back it. Tyler had written every conversation like a man recording instructions from a boss. My hands shook, but not from fear, from fury. Fury so controlled it felt almost cold. I turned on my recorder, placed the notebook beside the forged documents, and took photos from every angle, knowing CID would need clear evidence. Then I sat in my chair, breathing evenly, until the heat in my body settled into something sharp and steady. The next day, I walked into the CID office carrying the folder that now felt heavier than anything I had ever carried in uniform. Agent Ward looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable but alert. Captain Callahan, he said that tone investigators use when they sense a breakthrough. You have something. I placed the folder on his desk and slid it toward him. I think this is what you are looking for. He opened it slowly, reviewing each page with the kind of focused silence that fills a room. The forged loan application, the camera stills the screenshots of messages, the notebook pages with the damning sentences. Every time he turned a page, the muscles in his jaw tightened. When he finished, he leaned back, exhaling like he had been holding his breath since the moment he started reading. Captain Callahan, he said, this is not small. This is large-scale fraud, federal fraud, and it involves coercion theft impersonation and coordinated false allegations. I nodded. I know, and there is more on that notebook. I pointed to the remaining blank pages. Tyler mentioned someone he owes money to but did not write names. They will probably come looking. Ward tapped his pen against the desk, thinking. This could justify bringing in federal investigators and Texas law enforcement if necessary. Filing a false sexual misconduct report against a soldier could trigger multiple charges once we corroborate this. Then he looked at me more carefully. Not as an investigator assessing a witness, but as a man realizing the personal weight of what he was holding. This is your family. Yes, I said, but they crossed a line I cannot ignore. He nodded once firm. I will escalate this immediately. And, Captain, he added quietly, you did the right thing. Before leaving, I handed him one more item, the small flash drive containing the audio I had captured of Valerie whispering, if she will not sign, we ruin her career. Ward replayed it twice, then locked it in the evidence safe himself. When I stepped outside into the warm Texas air for the first time in months, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but certainty. The truth was no longer trapped inside their lies. It was documented, time-stamped, captured, preserved. It was real. And now it was headed straight into the military justice system, where lies collapse under testimony and evidence speaks louder than fear. And for the first time since everything began, I knew that the hearing would not be about defending myself. It would be about exposing them. When the date for the Article 32 hearing finally arrived, I woke before dawn with the same instinctive jolt that had carried me through countless early briefings in Germany. The air inside my apartment near Fort Sam Houston felt unnaturally still, as if the walls themselves understood what the day meant. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing before putting on my Class A uniform. It felt heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because it carried the truth I had fought for piece by piece over the last several weeks. By the time I stepped outside, the humid Texas air wrapped around me like a warning. My heart hammered, but my hands did not shake. Military police training hardens you in ways you do not fully appreciate until you are standing at the intersection of family betrayal and professional survival. I drove to the installation legal complex with my mind replaying every step that had led me there. Valerie's fake sweetness, Craig's arrogance, Tyler's pathetic attempt to make himself look helpless, the forged documents, the staged misunderstanding, and now their final move filing a misconduct report that could destroy my career if I did not defend myself perfectly. The parking lot was half full when I arrived. Soldiers moved quietly between buildings, but I sensed something different in the air. Word had spread. MP circles were small. Rumors travel even faster when someone claims a captain behaved inappropriately with a male relative. The kind of accusation no soldier ever wants attached to their name. I straightened my uniform and walked toward the entrance. Staff Sergeant Miller stood waiting against a brick wall, arms crossed, but eyes soft. "You ready, ma'am?" he asked. I nodded. "Ready enough." He hesitated before responding. "The whole shop knows the accusation doesn't match your record. They know you're solid. But hearings get messy. Your family looks confident. Make sure you're prepared for every angle." The warning settled in my stomach like a stone. Inside the waiting room, fluorescent lights cast a dull glow over beige walls and rows of metal chairs. My family sat on the far side, dressed in their version of polite respectability. Valerie wore a conservative navy dress and a necklace she always reserved for dramatic performances. Craig's suit jacket strained against his chest while he pretended to look composed. Tyler slouched beside them, rubbing his hands together theatrically like someone rehearsing fear. And they were not alone. Their attorney, a tall, balding man with a thin smile, sat in front of them reviewing a stack of papers. He did not look like a man who cared whether his clients were truthful. He looked like a man who loved court theatrics. When Valerie noticed me, she lifted her chin with an expression that blended triumph and condescension, as if today was the day she would finally put me in my place. Craig refused to look at me. Tyler glared with a mixture of anger and preemptive self-pity that made my skin crawl. I took a seat on the opposite side of the room. Miller lingered outside the door, ready if I needed him, though he could not attend the hearing itself. A few junior soldiers I recognized whispered in the back row. I caught fragments of their conversations, words like inappropriate and stepbrother and cannot believe. It was exactly the kind of rumor Hayes Valerie hoped to create. At precisely 0800, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors and called for the parties to enter. I stepped inside first. The hearing room was small, equipped with a raised bench where the military judge would sit several tables for counsel and a narrow aisle leading to the witness stand. The air felt chilled, but the tension radiated heat. As I approached my seat, I saw Colonel Marcus Avery, the appointed hearing officer, already organizing his materials. He was known for precision and for disliking dishonesty in any form. I had seen him in professional settings before, but never like this, never as the man standing between me and the destruction of my career. My family filed in behind me, taking their places at the respondent table. Their attorney walked with quick, confident strides and arranged his papers loudly enough to draw attention. He wanted the room to watch him. The judge looked up. "We will proceed. Captain Callahan, you are here today in response to allegations submitted through Military Family Advocacy and supported by a civilian complaint filed by Mr. and Mrs. Ryder, their last name." Hearing it spoken by a judge in this setting made my stomach tighten. "Yes, sir," I answered. "Very well." The judge turned toward the respondent side. "Counsel, are you prepared to present opening statements, sir?" the attorney said, rising eagerly. The judge gave him a curt nod. "Proceed." The attorney stepped forward, hands clasped. "Your Honor, this case is deeply troubling. It concerns a young man placed in an uncomfortable situation by a military officer who should have been a protector, not a source of distress. Tyler Ryder experienced what he interpreted as targeted suggestive behavior. Valerie Ryder witnessed inappropriate interactions. Craig Ryder feared for the integrity of his household. They simply want the truth acknowledged. Elise said nothing wrong. Valerie interrupted. Something wrong passed between them. Craig placed a heavy hand on her arm. Let him talk, Val. The judge raised one brow. There will be no interruptions. Continue. The attorney resumed. The family believes that Captain Callahan's conduct reflects poor judgment and possible misconduct unbecoming an officer. They request that the Army evaluate her status. When he finished, the room hung in static silence. It was a clean performance, carefully worded yet intentionally vague, exactly the kind that corrodes reputations. The judge turned his attention to me. Captain Callahan, you will have an opportunity to respond. Before that, we will hear testimony. Mrs. Ryder, please step forward. Valerie stood smoothing her dress as she moved toward the witness stand. She positioned herself as if preparing for a spotlight. Her voice trembled with artificial fragility. Your Honor, I tried to welcome Elise home. I tried to create harmony, but when she returned, she behaved in ways that made Tyler uncomfortable. She wore clothing that was not appropriate in the house. She acted in ways that suggested intentions I cannot say aloud. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my face still. Restraint was part of the training drilled into every MP. Tyler followed her testimony, adding dramatic pauses and wiping non-existent tears. Craig testified last, portraying himself as a helpless father figure caught in a confusing moral situation. The performance would have fooled anyone who did not know what they were capable of. When the judge finally turned back to me, I felt my pulse in my throat. Captain Callahan, you may respond. I stood slowly. Yes, sir. I have evidence. A ripple ran through the room. Valerie stiffened. Tyler froze. Craig narrowed his eyes. The judge folded his hands. Then we will review your submission. The atmosphere changed. For the first time since the hearing began, I felt the power shift, even if only slightly. It was enough to keep me steady enough to get to the next moment when everything would turn. The judge gestured for the bailiff to retrieve the folder I had prepared. As he opened it, I saw the slightest change in his expression. A flicker of recognition, then curiosity, then something calmer and colder. He read silently for several seconds. My family watched him with forced confidence. They had no idea what was coming. When he looked up again, there was a new gravity in his gaze, the kind that made the room itself lean forward. We will pause for a brief recess, he said. Counsel approach. My pulse thundered. I knew exactly what part of the evidence he had reached. The part that would detonate everything they had built against me. The room began to shift. Justice was finally starting to breathe. When the bailiff finally called my name and nodded for me to step forward, I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me. The hearing room inside the Fort Sam Houston JAG building was packed beyond what I expected. Rows of soldiers in uniform, civilian employees, a couple of officers from my brigade, and a scattering of people who clearly had nothing to do with me except an appetite for scandal. Military hearings always pulled a crowd. Add a whisper of misconduct with a family twist, and the room turned into a theater. I kept my face still, my boots steady, my breathing controlled the way we were trained to do under pressure, but a knot pulled tight under my ribs because I already knew what was coming. Valerie was seated to the left side of the room at the respondent table. She wore a soft cream blouse and a pearl necklace, the kind of outfit that whispered innocence, even when her eyes betrayed something sharp and strategic underneath. Her hands trembled lightly on the table, a performance I recognized from childhood arguments where she pretended to be fragile right before she struck. Beside her sat Craig, arms crossed, jaw set, in an exaggerated expression of disappointment. And beside him, Tyler slouched forward, shoulders hunched as if carrying unbearable shame. Theatrical, rehearsed, manipulative. I could feel the anticipation pulse through the entire room. They wanted a story. They wanted a fall from grace. And my family was ready to give them one. The presiding officer, Colonel Marcus Avery, instructed Valerie to begin her testimony first, since her report initiated the complaint. She stood slowly as if the weight of the world rested on her delicate frame. Then she looked around the room as if gathering silent affirmation before taking a deep breath. Colonel Avery said, "Please proceed." Valerie placed her hand dramatically on her chest. Her voice started quiet, almost breaking. "I never wanted to be here," she said. That one sentence alone tightened my jaw. It was the line every manipulator used before detonating a lie. She inhaled shakily, then continued. "Elise is my stepdaughter, and I have always tried to treat her like my own. She is strong and admirable, but lately she has been struggling with boundaries." The word boundaries landed like a stone in a lake. Ripples of whispers spread among the crowd. I kept my hands folded behind my back in parade rest, refusing to let my jaw twitch or my brow tighten. Valerie lowered her gaze like she could not bear to look at me. Several times in the past month, she said she acted inappropriately around her stepbrother. I tried talking to her woman to woman, but she brushed me off. I wanted the truth out because he is just a young man trying his best. Lies. Calculated lies. Tyler looked up on cue, eyes glassy, ready for his part. Valerie continued. One night, she approached Tyler in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. I will not repeat everything, but it was suggestive and frightening for him. A wave of whispers swept across the room, louder this time. I heard a low, "What in the back row?" A sergeant in the second row shook his head slowly, like he could not believe what he was hearing. That part was real. People always believed the first speaker in a scandal, and no one knew how to exploit that better than my stepmother. She adjusted her blouse even though it did not need adjusting. She then placed a trembling hand on Tyler's arm. He has been so upset he could not sleep. He was terrified of what she might do if we confronted her. My throat tightened in a different way now. Not fear. Anger. Sharp, controlled anger. Tyler sniffled loudly and finally lifted his tear-wet face toward the judge. His voice cracked exactly on schedule. "I did not want to testify, sir. I respect the military, but she scared me. Elise scared me. I felt the entire emotional weight of the room pull away from me and toward him. Manipulators thrived when people projected their own fears into a lie. And nothing stirred a military audience faster than the implication that an officer, especially an MP, had abused authority or crossed a moral line. Colonel Avery did not react, except for a tiny lift of his left brow, a detail most people would miss. He then said, "Mr. Tyler, please describe what happened in your own words." I could sense the tension building with every heartbeat. Tyler inhaled shakily, wiping his face again with the back of his sleeve. "She cornered me near the back hallway," he said. Her voice was low. "She told me I should loosen up and that she could teach me how to be confident with women." Someone in the back row muttered unbelievable. Someone else whispered disgusting. Valerie brought a tissue to her face, pretending to hold back tears. Craig leaned forward and said in a voice rough with false indignation she targeted him because he was vulnerable, and she thought she could get away with it. Colonel Avery held up his hand, signaling him to stop speaking without permission, but the damage was done. The room had absorbed the version my family wanted them to hear, and it was staggering how quickly the atmosphere changed. The soldiers who moments ago looked merely curious now looked like they were watching a trial of moral collapse. People shifted in their seats, avoiding my eyes. This was public exposure number 1. The kind of exposure designed to smear someone before evidence could speak, a tactic abusers knew well, a tactic my family had mastered. Colonel Avery finally turned toward me, his expression unreadable. "Captain Callahan, do you wish to respond?" My heart beat slow and steady because I had been waiting for that moment. "Yes, sir," I said. My voice was calm, unbroken, even though every lie they spilled tried to claw under my skin. "I do." All eyes turned to me again, but this time I knew I had control. The tide had not turned yet, but I felt the shift coming, and I held my ground, ready to break the entire performance apart piece by piece. When Valerie finally finished her trembling accusation and the room began to settle into that uneasy silence where people are too afraid to be the first to react, I felt something shift inside my chest like a tightening knot that suddenly found its final loop. The entire time she had been speaking, weaving her story about me behaving in a way that no soldier should, implying that I had acted with intent toward Tyler dragging my name through the dirt in front of officers who had trusted me for years and in front of soldiers who had trained under me. I felt every insult hit with a sting, yet none of it surprised me anymore. Shock had long since been replaced by clarity. Watching her standing there, blinking dramatically, holding a tissue as if she were the victim of some invisible tormentor, I felt this cold steadiness take over. The same steadiness I had learned to summon during raids, during tense negotiations, during nights when every detail could determine whether someone made it home or not. I waited until the judge nodded toward me, inviting me to respond. My stepfather sat with his arms crossed, jaw clenched, glaring at me with a certainty that he still believed he had the upper hand. My stepbrother wiped his eyes again, his shoulders shaking in exaggerated sobs, playing the perfect role his parents carved for him. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me, not just watching, but judging. Soldiers, NCOs, officers, a few civilians in the back, and the panel members seated to the right. Their expressions varied from confusion to suspicion to quiet disappointment. A few looked conflicted, as if they wanted to believe me, but the weight of the accusations was pressing too heavily. I slowly rose from my seat. My uniform felt heavier than usual, not because of shame, but because I understood the gravity of what came next. I placed both of my hands on the table for a brief moment to steady my breath, then lifted my chin and faced the military judge directly. My voice was calm when it came out. I said I have evidence. The room shifted. Even the air conditioning hum seemed to pause. Those 3 words cracked through the tension like a controlled detonation. Valerie froze mid-sniffle. Craig's face twitched. Tyler's hands stopped shaking. But before anyone could speak or interrupt or try to regain control of the narrative they had spent months constructing, I continued. I said the first sentence with the same tone I used when briefing soldiers before operations. Recorded statements. The judge straightened slightly in his seat. A few people in the room exchanged glances. I continued. Documented transactions. Now the room leaned in. Even some of the NCOs who had been skeptical moments earlier looked up with a new sharpness in their eyes. And then I'd delivered the last piece, the one I knew would land with the precision of a hammer on glass. Forged signatures. A quiet gasp rippled through the back rows. Someone muttered something under their breath. The tension snapped like overstretched wire. Valerie whispered, "That is not true." Craig growled, "She is lying." Tyler actually whispered, "What?" The judge raised his hand and silenced the entire room with one motion. "Captain Callahan," he said, voice low and neutral, "you will present your evidence. Bring your packet to the bench." His tone was controlled, but I had served long enough to hear the shift beneath it, the subtle note of interest that meant he already suspected something deeper was buried under the family theatrics unfolding before him. I picked up the folder I had prepared with CID. Each document placed in precise order, each recording transcribed, each photo time-stamped. I walked to the judge's desk slowly, letting each step carry the weight of everything they had tried to do to me. "Elise, stop this right now," Craig hissed. "It is enough," Valerie snapped. Tyler whispered, "Please." I did not look at them. The judge accepted the folder from my hands. He opened it with deliberate patience, flipping the first 2 pages, eyes scanning methodically. Then he reached the page that held the bank documents, the ones showing the attempted VA loan submission with my forged signature. His right eyebrow lifted. He continued. Next came the recorded audio of Valerie saying, "If she does not sign, we ruin her career." The judge paused, replayed that section silently in his mind as he stared at the transcript. Next was the ledger showing Tyler's loan debts and the notes tying those amounts to the forged paperwork. The judge's eyes narrowed. He turned another page, another, and another. With each turn, the room became still more suffocating, as if everyone could feel the truth gathering weight. Valerie had lost all color in her face. Craig shifted uncomfortably. Tyler looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under him. Finally, the judge closed the packet. He tapped the cover once with the tip of his finger, the sound sharp in the absolute silence of the room. He did not look at me when he spoke next. Instead, he looked straight at my family. His tone was even, but the steel inside it was unmistakable. These documents contained serious allegations of fraud against the United States government. Several soldiers flinched. Even experienced officers stiffened. Fraud involving VA loans was no small matter, and everyone in the room knew it. The judge continued, voice still calm. This hearing was scheduled to determine whether Captain Callahan engaged in misconduct. However, based on the contents of this packet, I now have reason to believe that the accusations submitted against her may have been constructed with malicious intent. Valerie whispered, "That is not true. That cannot be true. You cannot believe this." The judge lifted his gaze, meeting hers with a blunt and unwavering stare. "Mrs. Wilson, you will not speak unless you are addressed." Craig leaned forward. "This is all fabricated. She is manipulating you." The judge did not even look at him. He simply adjusted his glasses, tapped the folder again, and said, "Bring in the CID representatives." A collective shiver ran through the room. This was no longer a hearing. This was the beginning of something much bigger. The moment hung suspended in the air, as if even time itself paused, caught between what my family wanted the world to believe and what the truth was about to expose. And as the side door opened and the CID investigators entered, the judge finally glanced at me with a look I had waited months to see. A look that said he understood. A look that said the tide had shifted. And the room knew it too. When Colonel Marcus Avery lifted the final page of my evidence packet, the entire Article 32 room went silent so quickly it felt unnatural, like someone had sucked the oxygen straight out of the air. His expression did not shift at first. His face stayed firm, controlled, unreadable. Then his brow pinched. His eyes moved left to right slower than before, as though he wanted to ensure every detail was registered without missing a single stroke of ink. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, but even that sound felt like it dimmed. Valerie sat behind her attorney, pressing the tissue she had pretended to cry into earlier. Craig leaned forward like he was trying to read what the judge was reading. Tyler stared at the floor, with one leg bouncing rapidly, a nervous tic he could never control. The moment stretched until the tension grew tight enough to snap. The judge reached the final signature. My signature. Except it was not mine. He held the page up, looking at it as though admiring the boldness of the forgery. "Captain Callahan," he said slowly, "is this your signature?" His tone was calm, but sharpened at the edges like a blade. "No, sir," I answered, steady. "That is a forgery. A poor one." I heard Valerie inhale sharply. Craig shifted. Tyler muttered something barely audible. The judge nodded once, not dramatically, but firmly, as if confirming something he had already begun suspecting. He set the page down flat, tapped it twice with his index finger, and then looked up. His voice lowered, his posture straightened. And then something astonishing happened. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not fully, just the slightest shift, enough to signal that he had reached a conclusion no one in the room expected. Except me. The people seated in the observation row leaned forward. The legal clerk froze mid-keystroke. Even the air conditioning vents seemed to pause. Colonel Avery exhaled a slow, measured breath and said words that made the entire room tighten around itself. "Bring them in." His voice was not loud, but it carried through the courtroom like a command wave through a formation. The bailiff stiffened. The clerk blinked. The defense attorney looked confused. Craig actually tried to speak first. "What do you mean, bring who in?" But the judge held up a hand. "Sit down, Mr. McConnell. You will speak when spoken to." The main door at the back of the courtroom opened with a crisp, metallic click. The hinges groaned quietly. The light from the hallway spilled in, cutting a clean, bright line across the floor. Then boots sounded. Heavy, purposeful boots. Not the soft shoes of attorneys or administrative personnel. Military boots. Law enforcement boots. CID stepped in first. 2 agents. One of them was Special Agent Ward, the man I had first handed evidence to weeks earlier. His eyes met mine for a split second. He gave me the faintest nod, a small confirmation that everything I had feared was real, and everything I had done was justified. Behind them came 2 uniformed deputies from the Bell County Sheriff's Office. The room erupted in whispers. The judge did not look away from the bench. He spoke clearly for the record. "This hearing is no longer solely an inquiry into alleged misconduct by Captain Elise Callahan. It now includes suspected federal document fraud, suspected coercion, and suspected attempts to obtain government-backed housing benefits under false pretenses." I watched Valentine go pale. She clutched her purse as though it could save her. Craig opened his mouth again, but only a strangled sound came out. The judge continued. At the request of CID and in accordance with federal cooperation agreements, the following parties will be questioned under advisement right here regarding forged signatures, falsified loan materials, recorded threats, and attempted financial exploitation of a service member. Murmurs turned into gasps. The defense lawyer stammered, "Your Honor, this is irregular." Colonel Avery shot him a stare so sharp the man shut his mouth mid-sentence. "Irregular," he repeated. "You want to talk about irregular. Your clients filed sexual misconduct allegations which appear unsubstantiated. They submitted reports to military family advocacy that contradict each other within the same paragraph. They coordinated statements that do not align with timestamps locations or statements from witnesses. And now we have forged signatures on federal documents and attempts to transfer government benefits into the hands of individuals with outstanding criminal debts." He leaned forward. "If anything is irregular, counsel, it is the conduct of your clients." Valerie made a sound like she was choking. Craig slammed a hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. She is lying. We are victims here." That was when Agent Ward stepped forward. "Actually, sir, we have multiple forms of evidence contradicting your account." He opened a manila folder. Inside were photos of the forged signature sheets, screenshots of text messages between Valerie and Craig that had been retrieved with consent from the other party involved in their scheme. A printout of Tyler's debt ledger obtained legally through the sheriff's office, even a time-stamped recording of Valerie's voice saying, "If she will not sign, we will ruin her career." Ward continued. "We also have clear footage from Captain Callahan's personal room security device. The device was installed in her private quarters and is therefore admissible. The footage shows your son Tyler entering her room repeatedly without consent. It shows you Mr. McConnell rifling through her drawers. It shows Mrs. McConnell holding application forms for federal loan programs in her hand while saying the words, 'If we play this right, she will not fight back.' You were planning to use false accusations to force her compliance." A woman in the observation row covered her mouth. A soldier sitting near the aisle muttered, "Holy Lord," under his breath. Colonel Avery tapped the bench. "Order." I said order. Silence swept in, although raw disbelief still pulsed under it. He turned his attention to me. "Captain Callahan, please confirm. Is this the full extent of your evidence?" "No, sir," I replied. "There is more." I stepped forward and handed the clerk a final audio clip on a small encrypted drive. The judge gestured for it to be played. The courtroom speakers crackled, then Valerie's voice filled the room. "Just get her to come home for the weekend. She trusts you. Once she signs, we can move everything into your name and she will never know. And if she pushes back, she will not. She is military. She cares about her career more than life itself. We just use that." The playback ended. Silence. A crushing, heavy silence. Valerie looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath her. Craig slumped back as if someone had yanked the air straight out of his chest. Tyler started crying again, but it was different this time. Not the exaggerated trembling he had displayed earlier, but the panicked gasping of someone who realized the room believed none of his lies. Colonel Avery closed the file in front of him with deliberate calm. His voice was icy. "The only misconduct that occurred here today was perpetrated against Captain Callahan, not by her. You attempted to destroy the livelihood of a United States Army officer through calculated manipulation, forgery, and coercion." He lifted his chin. "CID deputies, please proceed." Agent Ward stepped behind Craig. A deputy stepped beside Valerie. Another deputy moved toward Tyler. The flashing panic in their eyes was unmistakable. The judge added, "And for the record, any further false statements from any of you will only deepen the charges you are already facing." Craig sputtered, "This is insane. You cannot do this." The judge raised an eyebrow. "I can, and I will." The hearing clerk wrote every word. Soldiers in the seats sat rigid as though afraid to breathe. The room felt electrified, charged by the collapse of a scheme built on arrogance and the first glimpse of justice finally surfacing. The judge looked toward me. "Captain Callahan, do you have anything you wish to add at this time?" I stood straighter than I had in days. "No, sir. The evidence speaks on its own." And how it spoke. The judge nodded slowly. Then, for the record, this hearing will proceed under expanded authority. Bring Them In had delivered exactly what I knew the truth would deliver: the absolute unraveling of everything they had tried to build against me. When Colonel Avery whispered those 3 words, the entire room seemed to inhale at once, as if oxygen itself paused to listen, and every eye snapped toward the rear doors of the hearing chamber. I stood frozen, but inside I felt a surge of something powerful, something that had been building for months. CID agents pushed the doors open, and in walked 2 Criminal Investigation Division officers, 2 Bazar County sheriffs, and a representative from Adult Protective Services. Their uniforms and badges glinted under the fluorescent lights, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I watched my stepfamily's confidence crack. Valerie's face drained to a chalky white. Craig stiffened in his seat, gripping the table so hard his knuckles went bone-colored. Tyler made a choking sound in his throat while trying to hide it beneath a theatrical cough, but no amount of acting could save them now. Colonel Avery adjusted his glasses and spoke in a voice that reverberated off every wall. "This hearing is no longer centered on allegations against Captain Callahan. It appears we must examine the conduct of those who brought the accusations forward." A ripple went through the gallery, and I heard someone whisper, "Good Lord," beneath their breath. Valerie tried to form a smile, the kind she used when she wanted to manipulate donors at church fundraisers, but it trembled into pieces halfway through. "Your Honor, we are simply concerned for Tyler's well-being," she said, her voice cracked like thin ice. Colonel Avery did not even turn to her. "Agents, please present the findings." CID Agent Ward stepped forward, holding the evidence packet I had given him weeks earlier. He placed it on the judge's desk with calm precision. This folder contains authenticated audio recordings extracted from Captain Callahan's devices, showing the accuser's admitted intention to falsify misconduct claims for financial gain. The words "financial gain" hit like a detonation. The room buzzed. Several soldiers shook their heads. A civilian woman gasped softly. I watched Tyler in the corner of my eye. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Agent Ward continued. "This includes a recording where Valerie Callahan states if she will not sign, we ruin her career." Colonel Avery raised his gaze slowly toward them, and his expression was colder than a January morning at Fort Drum. Valerie blinked rapidly. "That is taken out of context," she stammered. Ward spoke clearly. "There is no context in which a direct statement of malicious intent is acceptable, especially when tied to forged federal documents." Craig suddenly slammed both hands on the table, making everyone jolt. "Those documents are not forged. We had permission." Colonel Avery cut him off. "Captain Callahan, did you ever authorize any transfer of your GI benefits or federal housing entitlements?" "No, sir." "Did you ever sign any of these documents?" "No, sir." Agent Ward turned a page in his file. "Our handwriting analysis unit confirmed that the signatures were not hers. Additionally, Tyler Callahan has outstanding debts with 3 private lenders, including one known gang-affiliated lender. You expected Captain Callahan to assume those debts through fraudulent federal programs." Tyler's face contorted with panic. He leaned toward Valerie, whispering harshly, but everyone could hear because the room had gone dead silent. "You said they would not find out, you promised." Valerie flinched as if slapped. Craig looked at them both in fury, then turned red in the face like a man boiling from the inside out. Colonel Avery tapped his gavel once the sound sharp and final. "Enough!" He turned toward the sheriffs. "Do any of you wish to question the family?" Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, adjusting his belt and fixing Craig with an unblinking stare. "Mr. Callahan, we obtained a warrant this morning. Your phone messages indicate knowledge of the forged documents, as well as discussions with an individual promising to clear your son's debt if the transfer went through." Craig's jaw moved side to side like he was chewing through steel. "That has nothing to do with her," he said, jerking a thumb at me. She tempted him. She led him on. "That is the real issue here." The words hung in the air like poison. Colonel Avery straightened. "Mr. Callahan, your son is 25 years old. Captain Callahan is 30. There is no evidence whatsoever of any misconduct on her part. The only misconduct in this room is yours." The room erupted, not chaos but a wave of indignation. Soldiers muttered under their breath. Some civilians looked as though they wanted to applaud. When Craig opened his mouth again, Avery pointed directly at him. "Sit down." His tone was lethal. Craig sat. Valerie tried to speak next, tears pooling in her eyes. "Colonel Avery, I promise we were misled." Craig pressured me. "Tyler needed help. We just—" Colonel Avery leaned in slightly. "Did you or did you not submit a written statement alleging sexual misconduct by Captain Callahan?" Valerie nodded, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. "Did you have any proof?" "No." "Did your son ever report an incident?" "He was scared," she said desperately. "He was confused." Colonel Avery looked at Tyler. "Is that true?" Tyler swallowed several times before whispering, "No." Valerie whipped her head toward him in disbelief. "Tyler," Tyler trembled, his voice cracking. "I needed the money. We all needed the money. She was supposed to sign. You said we would lose everything if she did not. And you told me to go along with it." The room exploded again, this time with audible shock. Valerie froze. Craig slammed a fist into the table again, but weaker this time, like a man running out of ammunition. Colonel Avery's face remained carved from stone. "Captain Callahan, please step forward." I walked to the front, my boots steady on the floor, though my heart pounded like a drum line. Colonel Avery spoke with formal gravity. "Captain Callahan, you have been falsely accused. You provided substantial evidence of malice fraud and attempted coercion. This court acknowledges your integrity." My chest tightened, not out of fear, but relief, the kind that sinks deep into your bones. Then he turned to the family. Craig Callahan, Valerie Callahan, Tyler Callahan. You knowingly submitted false allegations which jeopardized the career of a United States Army officer. You forged federal documents. You attempted to exploit military benefits. These are not small matters. He nodded once to the officers. "Continue." The sheriffs stepped behind Craig and Valerie. They were not yet cuffed. This was still a hearing, not an arrest, but the symbolism was unmistakable. Tyler put his face in his hands as if the weight of the entire world had finally collapsed onto him. I watched all of it, the deception, the manipulation, the cruelty they used against me, all laid bare in front of strangers, peers, soldiers, civilians. It was almost surreal, and beneath everything, a quiet truth pulsed inside me. Justice was not loud, it was not pretty, it was not triumphant. Justice was steady and clear and patient. And today, justice finally spoke. Colonel Avery tapped his gavel one last time. "The only misconduct here is yours." Those 8 words echoed through the chamber like thunder. And for the first time since the day I stepped back into that toxic house, I felt something lift off my shoulders, something heavy and years old like a stone rolling away. They had tried to break me, but instead they had revealed themselves. The truth had come out for everyone to see, not whispered behind closed doors, not twisted by their lies. Public exposure full and irreversible. When I turned to face the audience, I saw sympathy, respect, and maybe even admiration. But none of that mattered as much as the one thought burning bright inside me. This is not the end. This is the beginning of justice. It happened on a Thursday evening about 3 weeks after the Article 32 hearing, when everything in my life had finally begun to settle. I had just finished my shift at Fort Sam Houston, and the sun was sliding low across the San Antonio skyline, washing the buildings in gold while the heat hummed through the pavement. I remember thinking that maybe peace was finally within reach. My schedule had returned to normal. My chain of command began treating me with the respect I had before the false accusations. Even the CID agents whom I had worked with for weeks sent a final note of thanks for my cooperation. For the first time in months, I walked through my apartment door without bracing for the next attack. I set my keys on the table thinking about making dinner when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the caller ID and froze. Valerie, my stepmother, the last person on earth I wanted to hear from. I stared at the screen for a good 5 seconds, weighing whether I should even answer. But something told me that ignoring the call would only postpone the inevitable. So I breathed in slowly, then swiped to accept. "Elise," she said the moment the call connected. Her voice was tight, like she had been crying or yelling, maybe both. Before she could say anything else, I answered in the flattest voice I could manage. "What do you want, Valerie?" She inhaled shakily, and for a brief second I imagined her sitting in her kitchen with the cheap floral wallpaper and the chipped wooden table where so many battles between us had started. I imagined her face pale with the weight of consequences she never thought she would face. "Elise, please listen," she said. "We need your help." "We," I repeated slowly. "You mean you, Craig, and Tyler?" A pause. "Mostly Tyler," she whispered. "He is in trouble. Real trouble." My jaw tightened. I let silence stretch because I wanted her to feel it not out of cruelty, but because sometimes silence is the only way to expose truth. Valerie kept talking, spilling words out fast like she worried I would hang up. "After the hearing, everything spiraled," she said. "CID kept calling the house, and those investigators from the sheriff office came by twice. They questioned Craig about the loan applications and the forged signature. They want Tyler in court next week. They want him to testify. Elise, he is terrified." I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter, letting the cool surface steady me. Terrified. The same word I had once used to describe how I felt walking into that hearing with 3 people who were supposed to be my family, trying to destroy my entire career. Valerie kept talking, perhaps taking my silence as permission. "They say Tyler could face charges," she whispered. "Fraud, misuse of government paperwork, obstruction. Elise, he is only 25. He is scared. He needs someone to speak for him. Someone the court trusts. Someone like you." There it was. The audacity return. The desperate attempt to pull me back into their chaos, as if we were still tied together, as if all the lies, all the manipulation, all the attempts to destroy my reputation could simply be washed away when they needed something. I felt something cold settle inside my chest. "You want me to defend him," I said. "Elise, please," she said. "You know how he gets. He was pressured. Craig pushed him into everything. He never meant harm. He looks up to you." That sentence almost made me laugh. Looked up to me. He had looked down on me for years. He had walked into my room without permission. He had followed whatever scheme Craig set for him, and he had stood in that courtroom pretending to be a victim while trying to paint me as something unthinkable. Valerie continued speaking, sounding more frantic by the second. "The investigator said if he cooperates, he might get leniency. They said if someone in the military vouched for his character, it would help. Maybe a statement from you about how he is a good person deep down." I let her finish. Then I spoke slowly, carefully, every syllable sharp as glass. "Valerie, I protected myself. You can do the same for him." She inhaled sharply like she had been slapped. "Elise, please be reasonable," she said. "You know what a record can do to someone. A conviction could ruin his future. He is young. He made mistakes. We all make mistakes." I almost laughed again, but it was not amusement. It was disbelief mixed with a bitterness I had never wanted to know. "Mistakes," I said. "Is that what we are calling forgery, fraud, manipulation, and deliberately lying to federal investigators?" "Elise, do not do this," she said, her voice trembling. "Do not turn your back on your family." Family. The word echoed like poison. My family was gone when I was 17. The people I had left were the ones who tried to use me, then destroy me when I would not let them. Valerie continued speaking, trying every angle she could think of. "We were under pressure," she said. "We lost money. Tyler was drowning in debt. Craig thought if you just signed the papers, everything would be fine. They said the loan officers would never even notice. We made mistakes, Elise. We got scared." I took a breath, steady and controlled. "Valerie, you tried to ruin my career. You tried to paint me as someone who preyed on your son. You tried to destroy everything I spent 10 years building. For a loan. For money. For the easy way out. Do not call it fear. Call it what it is. Choices. Bad ones." She did not answer. I could hear her swallowing hard. Then her voice came out smaller. "Ty is my son," she whispered. "He is all I have. Elise, I am begging you. Help him. Help us." My hand tightened around the phone. I remembered Tyler cornering me near the staircase. I remembered Craig grabbing me and trying to force my hand on paperwork I did not owe them. I remembered Valerie accusing me of luring her son. And then I remembered CID walking into the courtroom when the judge whispered, "Bring them in," and my knees steadied because for the first time, people saw the truth. That moment of justice had taken months to reach. It had nearly cost me my career, my sanity, my sense of self. I opened my eyes and let the truth settle. "I am not your solution, Valerie," I said. "You made your choices. You can face the consequences." She sucked in a breath as if she could not accept what she was hearing. "Elise, wait," she said. "We can fix this. We can go to them together. Please." I answered calmly, "No," and I hung up. For a long time, I stood completely still, the phone cooling in my hand while the evening sun bled across the floor. I expected guilt. I expected conflict. Instead, I felt something else. Relief. Powerful, simple relief. Not because they were suffering, but because for the first time I had finally broken the cycle. I had stopped trying to save people who would never save me. Later that night, CID called to inform me that Valerie and Craig had been officially charged with falsifying documents and obstruction, and Tyler had been ordered to appear for questioning. I thanked them for the update, then stepped outside onto my balcony. The sky was fading to violet. The air was warm. For the first time in years, it felt like a life that belonged to me. I closed my eyes and whispered the words that had carried me through the hearing. "Protect yourself, Elise. No one else will do it for you." And I knew in that moment that I was done carrying the weight of people who chose to betray me. The story was not over yet, but the hardest part was behind me. I had walked through the fire and finally stepped out clean. When the hearing ended and the military courtroom finally emptied out, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity settle into my chest. For weeks, I had lived in a state of quiet readiness like a soldier walking patrol in the dark, knowing something was out there, but not knowing when it would strike. Now everything was in the open and the truth was no longer something I needed to defend alone. The investigation that followed moved faster than I expected. Military CID and the Bexar County Sheriff's Office coordinated with federal investigators since forged signatures and fraudulent use of military benefits fell under both state and federal jurisdiction. I was contacted 3 times during the first week for follow-up statements and evidence verification. Each time I answered their questions with the calmness I had learned from years in the Army. Facts were my armor, and I had plenty of them. I learned through official updates that Valerie was the first to break. She had always relied on her charm and her ability to manipulate sympathy. But when interviewed separately from Craig and Tyler, she contradicted herself half a dozen times. Investigators discovered she had submitted false income documents on the VA home loan application and impersonated me during a phone verification call. Federal law does not forgive that easily. They charged her with making false statements and attempted fraud involving federal benefits. Because she cooperated after being confronted with recordings and documents, her attorney negotiated a plea that resulted in probation. I was not surprised. Valerie had always built an image of herself as a respectable woman, and perhaps the threat of losing that image scared her more than the threat of any jail cell. But regardless of her sentence, the truth was recorded permanently. Craig was a different story. Stoic, defensive, convinced he could outbluff the federal investigators the way he had bullied and controlled people most of his adult life. He refused to admit wrongdoing during his interviews and tried to frame everything as a misunderstanding and a family disagreement blown out of proportion. Unfortunately for him, the forensics on the forged documents were undeniable. The handwriting analysis, the timestamps on digital files, the phone records, and the text messages he sent to Valerie telling her to push me to sign were all part of the case file. The charges recommended for him were more serious because he had initiated the fraudulent plan and maintained control of most of the forged paperwork. I was told he eventually accepted a plea agreement that included a substantial fine restitution and a multi-year federal monitoring requirement that restricted his access to loan programs. It was a softer punishment than I once thought I wanted, but when I finally read the summary of his sentencing, I felt something loosen in my shoulders. It was not about revenge. It was accountability, and sometimes accountability looks quieter than rage, but lasts longer. Tyler was the one I thought about the most in the quiet moments. The investigators discovered his gambling debts, his associations with loan sharks in Houston, and his dependency issues that had been worsening for nearly 2 years. When confronted with the evidence that he had willingly participated in the plan to use my identity and benefits to pay off his debts, he crumbled completely. He admitted almost everything and agreed to participate in a rehabilitation program as part of his sentence. A Texas judge mandated outpatient treatment, financial counseling, and ongoing community service. I heard the news while sitting in my apartment at Fort Sam, Houston, with a cup of coffee in my hands. I did not feel triumph, only a sort of bittersweet acceptance that Tyler had been lost long before this investigation started, and perhaps this was the first time anyone forced him to turn around and see the path he was walking. As for me, the Army handled my case with surprising swiftness. The baseless allegations Valerie and Craig had made were formally dismissed. My commanding officer called me into his office one morning and handed me a written commendation for maintaining professionalism under personal duress and for reporting federal benefit fraud correctly. He said, "Very few soldiers have the courage to hold their own family accountable." I thanked him and stood at attention as he pinned a small recognition coin into my palm. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than any courtroom victory. I was assigned a short period of leave to recover from the ordeal. The first day of leave, I drove to a quiet park near San Antonio. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and the Texas breeze smelled like cedar and dust. For the first time in months, my mind was not calculating the next threat or the next move. I sat on a bench overlooking a field and simply breathed. I thought about my mother. Not Valerie, but my real mother, who had died when I was 17. I wondered what she would have thought of all this. I hoped she would have been proud that I defended myself without becoming like the people who hurt me. I thought about the soldiers I had served with in Germany and how often we talked about integrity as if it were a piece of equipment, something you carry, something you maintain, something you do not lose. In the Army, integrity is measured by what you do when no one is watching. In my family, integrity was tested by what I did when everyone was watching and lying at the same time. Later that week, I returned to Fort Hood to meet with Staff Sergeant Miller. He greeted me with a grin and a smack on the shoulder. He had followed the updates closely. He told me that word had spread across the unit about what happened in the hearing room and how the judge had whispered those 3 unforgettable words. "Bring them in." Miller said that moment would probably be retold in the barracks for years. Part of me felt embarrassed, but another part felt deeply seen. Not for the accusations, but for the strength it took to stand through them. A few days after that, I received an unexpected letter from the military judge, Colonel Avery. It was handwritten on official stationery and delivered through the base mailroom. The letter was short, but incredibly deliberate. "Captain Callahan, sometimes justice moves slowly, but it does move. You carried yourself with honor in a situation that would have broken many. You did the right thing. Keep walking with your head high." I read that letter 3 times and folded it carefully into my journal. I knew I would keep it for the rest of my life. The aftermath was not perfect. No justice story ever is. Family wounds do not heal cleanly, and the scars of betrayal do not vanish simply because the truth is written in a case file. Yet I felt something new building inside me, a steadiness, a quiet confidence, a sense that the ground beneath my feet was finally solid again. One evening near the end of my leave, I stood outside the gates of Fort Sam, Houston at sunset. The sky over Texas was a canvas of pink and gold. Soldiers walked past me heading to evening chow or weekend plans, but I stayed still for a moment, letting the warm light fall across my face. I whispered to myself that one small sentence I had earned through every battle fought in silence. I am still standing, and no lie, no signature, no accusation will ever take that from me again. I stood in front of the main gate of Fort Sam, Houston, as the sun dipped low across the Texas sky, painting everything in warm strokes of orange and muted gold. The day was quiet, the kind of quiet that does not ask for permission. It just settles in your bones slowly until you finally feel the weight you have been carrying slipping off piece by piece. I had not realized how much tension I had learned to live with over the past months, how much of my breath I had kept locked in my chest, or how often sleep had turned into a battlefield of its own. But that evening, watching the light spread across the parade field and the distant hum of a convoy heading toward the motor pool, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. The kind that creeps up on you after the storm has emptied every last drop. The kind that arrives only after you fight like hell to earn it. I leaned against the warm metal railing near the guard post and let my eyes drift across the base. Soldiers in PT gear were finishing their evening run. A pair of medics walked side by side carrying duffel bags slung over their shoulders. A chaplain paused to wave as he crossed toward the chapel annex. Ordinary moments, everyday scenes, the small, quiet things that make the Army feel more like a moving city than an institution. I had missed these fragments of normal life, and now they felt sharper, clearer, more meaningful than they had ever felt before. Maybe that is what surviving a war you never expected to fight does to you. Not a war overseas, a war inside your own home, a war where your enemies share your last name. I thought about the hearing. I had replayed that moment in my head so many times that I could still hear every breath in the courtroom, every shift of fabric, every muffled gasp when the military judge whispered those three chilling words, "Bring them in." I remembered the way my stepmother Valerie froze, caught in her own lies, the way Craig clenched his fists as the truth finally cornered him, the way Tyler stared at the floor when he realized no amount of fake tears could save him from what he had done. It had taken everything in me not to collapse with relief right then, but military police officers do not collapse in front of an audience. We hold our ground, we breathe, we wait. And when the storm breaks, we stand still so no one mistakes gratitude for weakness. But later alone, when the base housing lights flickered on one by one, and the last of the adrenaline drained from my muscles, I had sat on the edge of my bunk and let myself feel all of it. The betrayal, the anger, the fear, the shame of being accused of something so twisted that it threatened to stain everything I had worked for since the day I first put on the uniform. I had been strong, but strength is not the absence of pain. It is choosing to move even when the pain tries to anchor you to the floor. And now, standing in front of the Fort Sam Houston Gate, hearing the flag ropes rattle lightly against the pole in the evening breeze, I let myself think about my parents, my real parents, the ones who did not live to see me make it to this point. My father who died when I was 15, my mother who I lost 2 years later. They had been good people, quiet people, the type who believed in earning what you own and returning what you borrow. Sometimes I wondered what they would think if they could see what had unfolded over the past months. Would they be proud that I stood my ground, that I refused to let lies define me, that I protected my career and my integrity even when my own family tried to weaponize them against me? I believed they would, and that belief steadied me more than anything the Army had ever taught me. I stepped away from the gate and walked down the small paved path leading toward the parking lot. My boots crunched softly on the gravel at the edge. The breeze told me the night would be cooler than usual for late summer in San Antonio. I passed the memorial wall near the entrance. I always slowed down there. Names etched into metal plates, pictures tucked into corners, flowers left by families who would never again hear the words, "Welcome home." I whispered a quiet thank you, something I had done since I was 19. Maybe it was the only ritual I never let life steal from me. My phone buzzed once, a notification. I hesitated before pulling it out. After everything I had been through, I had learned that peace sometimes came in moments where you simply did not pick up calls from the past. But it was a message from Miller. "Just checking in, Captain." "You good?" I typed back. "Better than before." He replied almost instantly. "You earned that. Swing by the office tomorrow. The commander wants to congratulate you." I smiled to myself, not because I needed praise, but because recognition after surviving something as ugly as what I had survived felt like closure. I kept walking until I reached my truck. The air smelled faintly of cedar and warm pavement, and somewhere in the distance a soldier was practicing trumpet notes for the evening bugle call. I opened the door but did not get in. Instead, I stood there and let everything settle. The justice, the aftermath, the weight lifted. Valerie had pleaded for leniency, but the court had drawn a hard line. Craig had been forced to face the financial fraud he committed. Tyler had been pushed into treatment, which was more mercy than he had ever shown me. And me. I had kept my rank. My record remained intact. My future was still mine. But beyond the justice, something else had changed in me. I had learned where my strength really lived. Not in my uniform, not in the authority of my badge, not even in the training I could recite backward in my sleep. My strength lived in the moments when the whole world tried to strip away who I was, and I still chose to remain myself. I leaned my forehead against the edge of the truck door. The metal was warm and grounding. I closed my eyes and took a long breath, then another. As the last rays of sunlight dropped behind the roofline of the base, I whispered the thought that had carried me through the hardest nights. You can survive anything when the truth is yours. I straightened, got into the truck, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I imagined the people who might someday hear my story, the ones who had been taught to stay silent, the ones who had been shamed or manipulated by the people who claimed to love them, the ones who believed they had no voice because no one had ever listened. Maybe my story would reach someone like that. Maybe it would remind them of what my judge reminded me. You do not have to accept the version of yourself that others invent. There is a moment in every journey when you reclaim your own name. And this was mine. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs courage today. I had been back on duty at Fort Sam Houston for about 3 weeks when the letter arrived tucked between routine mail from the Installation Support Office and a small package from a soldier I once supervised overseas. At first, I thought it was another administrative update or maybe a follow-up document from CID, but when I saw the sender block, my breath paused. Office of the Military Judiciary. The handwriting was unmistakably deliberate, the kind of penmanship belonging to a man who had spent decades weighing decisions that could change the course of a service member's life. I sat on the small bench outside the company HQ the late Texas afternoon, stretching long shadows across the pavement as I held the envelope between my fingers. My heart did not race the way it had during the hearing or in the weeks leading up to it. This felt different, quiet, steady. A kind of closure I had not realized I needed until the moment it touched my hands. I opened the envelope, carefully sliding out a single folded page. The paper was heavier than standard memo stock and carried a faint, clean scent, something between pressed cotton and old books. I unfolded it slowly, almost reverently, and read the single handwritten line at the center of the page. You did the right thing, Captain. Below it was the signature of Military Judge Colonel Marcus Avery, the same man who had looked my stepfather, stepmother, and stepbrother in the eyes and seen through every fabricated tear, every trembling lie, every calculated accusation they had weaponized to destroy me. The same man who had whispered, "Bring them in," and opened the door for justice to walk into that room. The same man who had given my voice the weight it deserved. I read the sentence again. You did the right thing, Captain. The simplicity of it struck deeper than any speech could. I leaned back, letting the warm Texas air brush against my face, carrying the distant sounds of cadence calls, hum of training vehicles, and the metallic clatter of soldiers ending their day. It reminded me why I chose this life. Not for the medals or the promotions or the rigid structure. For the belief that truth matters, that discipline matters, that integrity is the quiet kind of strength even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. The investigation following the hearing had officially concluded just a week earlier. Valerie received probation and mandatory financial restitution for forging my signature on federal documents. Craig faced a federal fine for attempting to fraudulently obtain government-backed loans. Tyler had been ordered into a structured rehabilitation and financial accountability program run by the county. Their consequences were not as harsh as some people might have hoped, but that was never the point. I had not wanted revenge in the sense of destruction. I had wanted the truth to stand up straight and visible, no longer bent beneath their manipulation. I wanted safety. I wanted peace. And I wanted the chance to breathe again without waiting for another blow from the people who once claimed to be my family. I folded the letter gently and slid it back into the envelope, tucking it into the inner pocket of my uniform blouse. Soldiers walked past me, some laughing, some exhausted, some already talking about weekend plans. Life moved around me in the rhythm only a military installation can carry. One made up of resilience, repetition, purpose. Rising training, enduring serving. It felt right to stand again. I walked toward the edge of the parade field where the sky was beginning to pull into deep gold. The sun hung low over the Texas horizon, creating a soft haze that made the base look almost painted. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply exist, without the weight of accusation or fear. No courtroom, no hostile stares, no whispered lies, no threats disguised as family concern. Just me, the uniform I earned, and the life I reclaimed piece by piece. It struck me how long I had been living under a shadow I did not fully acknowledge until the hearing ripped it open. My stepfamily had never loved me. Not really. They loved what they could gain from me. My discipline, my credit, my benefits, my silence. And when I finally refused to play the role they assigned me, they turned to the one weapon they thought could break me. A lie crafted to mimic shame. A lie meant to echo in the halls of command. A lie that could have cost me everything. But the truth won, not quickly, not gently, but undeniably. The horizon shifted into shades of orange and dusty rose as I stepped closer to the fence line overlooking the rest of the installation. A warm breeze pulled at my sleeves, carrying the low, steady hum of the American flag as it brushed against its pole. I felt another layer of tension release from my shoulders. Not all at once. Just a slow uncoiling, the kind that comes from surviving something ugly and recognizing that its grip no longer owns you. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I ignored it. The peace of that moment felt too valuable to interrupt. I wanted to stand in it, breathe it, own it. Colonel Avery could have sent a formal note or a typed legal summary, but instead he chose 9 handwritten words. "You did the right thing, Captain." The validation was profound in its simplicity. I closed my eyes briefly and pictured the hearing room again, the stiff posture of my stepfather, the shaky false innocence on Tyler's face, the brittle smugness of Valerie, the hush of the crowd, the judge's expression shifting as he reached the section of the file that revealed everything, the faint smile, the whispered order that changed the entire direction of the room. Bring them in. It had been the sound of justice sharpening its edge. When I opened my eyes again, I felt something I had not experienced since before my deployment. Not victory, not vindication. Something quieter, a calm that stretched into every corner of my ribs, like the ground beneath my feet finally settled. I turned away from the field and headed back toward the barracks path, the fading sun casting long shadows behind me. Tomorrow would be another duty day, another shift, another reminder that the world keeps moving no matter the storms that try to pull you under. But tonight, I carried something different with me. Not the fear of what my family might try next, not the dread of how their lies could twist my reputation, but a letter folded against my heart from a judge who saw the truth and spoke it plainly. "You did the right thing, Captain." I walked toward the parking lot, the last of the sunlight brushing across the concrete. My boots felt lighter than they had in months. I realized I was finally free.